Hello, my darlings. Madam Raven here. Before we start, I'm just going to let you know this is a new series that will go on for a while. It's by Barkles 52, and it's about Sarah Barkley, a police officer, and the strange things she encounters. I'm calling it the Officer Sarah Barkles Chronicle. Barkley, the Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicles, Part 1. I'm a local. I'm way too far from the microphone. And now I'm too close. I'm a local rookie cop in a small town in Pennsylvania, currently stuck working night shift. I work the normal patrol shift, driving around, pulling traffic, responding to your normal domestic disputes, and whatever other wonderful calls dispatch sends my way. But ever since this past weekend, every single night, I keep getting called to the same house. At first, I thought it was my coworkers playing pranks on the rookie. I have 2 years on the job, but in such a small town, I work with most guys my dad's age. I've omitted certain names and addresses for obvious reasons. Anyway, here's what happened. Friday night around 0200 hours, so actually Saturday morning, dispatch gets over the radio. Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead. We just got a 911 hang-up from a landline that is coming back to Patch Lane. Can you go check it out? 10-4, en route. So I immediately started driving to the address, which was about 6 miles away. But it's a pretty rural area, so I get there in less than 10 minutes. I turn around on the gravel lane, and in about 10 seconds I see a house up ahead, on the right. No lights on inside. I park my cruiser on the gravel lane, lights off so as to not announce myself in case there's an actual emergency going on inside. We are trained not to just roll up to a house, lights on, in case the subject decides to ambush the officers arriving with gunfire. Anyway, I quietly approach the old farmhouse and check the perimeter. No sign of anything, no lights, no sound, not even a car parked anywhere. I began to think maybe dispatch got the wrong address. 1034 to dispatch. Dispatch, go ahead. I'm at Patch Lane. Can you confirm this is the address? Stand by. 1034, yes, that's the correct address. Do you need backup? Negative. Appears no one is home, but I'll update. At this point, I knock on the front door and announce myself. Officer Barkley? Police Department. No answer. All the windows were closed, and I gently tried the front door. Locked. 1034 to dispatch. Dispatch, go ahead. It looks like this house is abandoned. I think the 911 hang-up might have been some wires crossed. Clear me no report. 10-4. At this point, it's about 0230 hours, and I need a cup of coffee since I have another 3.5 hours left on shift. I head over to the local 24-hour gas pump and find 2 of my ever-so-busy coworkers standing there fueling up on caffeine as well. They grin and ask me if I had fun responding to the old Doc's house. Clearly, I must have had a dumb look on my face, showing the confusion I was feeling, because then he goes, "You don't know, do ya?" He continues, "That old farmhouse belonged to Dr. Wentz. He was the guy that I'm sure you heard about, who used to do botched abortions and all sorts of inhumane procedures back in the 1800s. He's the guy all the rich went to when they had young daughters get knocked up or when they had special needs child they didn't want to keep. He built that house himself and even named the road Patch Lane, as a joke of all the patching he did for people. I finished my coffee, laughing about the old tale the guys were trying to pull over on me. I wasn't going to let these guys spook me, especially being that I was one of the only females on the department. I have to have skin twice as thick. I finish up my shift, get some Z's, and I go back in on Saturday night. Around the same time, maybe a little later, around 2:30 hours, I get the call. Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead. We've got another 911 hang-up from the same number as last night. This time they stayed on the line and we could hear someone talking but can't make it out. Can you go check it out again? Can you confirm the address again? It comes back to Patch Lane. Now, I'm pretty sure the guys are getting dispatch in on some type of joke, but whatever. I still have to respond. Better safe than sorry. So I drive down the road, turn onto the gravel road, park my cruiser away from the house, check the perimeter, and go up to the front door. Still no signs of life inside. I knock on the door and announce myself. Officer Barkley with the police department. I'm about to leave and I go check the door handle. Out of pure habit, and sure as shit, the door opens. I was so startled by the fact that the door opened, my right hand immediately went for my gun on my right side. I announced myself again. Officer Barkley, redacted, police department. Come to the front door or else I'm entering. Before entering a house, for officer safety reasons, we always get on the radio. 1034 dispatch. Dispatch, go ahead. No one appears home, but the front door was unlocked. I'm going to make entry and check the house. It appears abandoned, though. Do we have any backup available? 1034. All units are still on the fatal DUI accident. Do you need one to break? Negative. I will advise. I figured I didn't need backup breaking from a potential homicide scene for an abandoned house search. I made entry, gun drawn. I proceeded through the first floor, dodging cobwebs and stepping over dead insects and critters. I continue upstairs through the bedrooms, closets, everywhere a person could be. I checked. I worked my way back downstairs and checked the basement. It's a pretty small basement, but it's broken in several tiny rooms. One room had a metal door with a padlock on it. The padlock needs a key to open it and is completely rusted shut, covered in cobwebs, and even one big old black spider was guarding that lock, having made it its home. Clearly this lock has been there for years, maybe decades. I didn't worry much about it since there's no way anyone was in there due to how rusted this old lock was. Even the keyhole looked corroded and filled with rust and dirt. I eventually left and advised dispatch no report. I grab a cup of hot coffee around 0400 hours and catch up with one of the guys from the DUI crash. I ask him what that mess of a scene looked like. He told me I was lucky I wasn't stuck on that scene. He asked me about the Patch Lane house, and I told him it was pretty effing creepy, but I checked it out, and it has to be crossed wires somewhere. I felt comfortable telling him it was creepy since I knew this guy from when my dad was still on the force, and he treats me like a daughter. He said he used to get dropped calls all the time from back there in the 90s, but there was an actual family living there back then. Each time he got dispatched, they were surprised to see him, and they let him search the whole house. Never any problems. Just a single mom with her 2 kids minding their own business. I asked him what happened to that family, and he said nothing suspicious. They moved away maybe 10 months or so. Definitely less than a year. And a few families moved in and out, renting the house. But ever since about the late 90s, nobody moved in. I asked him if he remembered there being a locked room in the basement, honestly not really knowing what I was expecting as a response, and his eyebrows raised, and he said, "You know what? I actually didn't remember till you asked me just now. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, the only reason I remember is because the nice girl that lived there with her kids didn't have a key and couldn't get into the room, and was asking me if I knew a local locksmith, but I told her I really didn't know anyone, since anytime the cops needed somewhere, we just smashed the lock open." She giggled, and I remember she was a very attractive-looking girl. We both shrugged it off, finding it odd, but moved on with our shift into the early hours with another DUI stop and a domestic violence call from a guy whose wife drank too much and decided it was a good time to confront him for cheating on her 3 years ago. Fast forward to Sunday night. Back at work, and this time the call comes out right at 300 hours. "Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead. Hey, we have another 911 hang-up from at Patch Lane. Are you able to go?" Since I was in the middle of eating my lunch, I decided not even to go. "Yeah, dispatch, I cleared the house last night, and I didn't even see a landline phone in that house. Stand by. 1034 to Sergeant Oakley." "Oakley, go ahead." "Hey, Sarge, did you hear this call? Do you need me to go, or can we clear it?" 1034, just drive by. No need to go in if you don't see anything, but at least drive by." Received. Show me en route. I was pissed since I didn't get to finish eating, but I did my job and drove down the gravel road. This time, the front door was wide open, and I know I shut it closed the night before. At this point, I began to think a homeless person is inside, which is still trespass. So I call out to dispatch. I have an open door and I'm going to check it out. I made entry, and this time I did see someone run around the corner. My gun is drawn since I have no idea what to expect here, and I announce myself and run after them. When I turn the corner, it's just the kitchen and door to the basement. No way out. I run into the basement, and nobody is effing down there. Nobody. I get on my radio and ask for backup, but get no response. I make my way back up, and still nothing on the radio. I finish clearing the house and still can't find the person. I make my way out to the cruiser and use the cruiser radio, and I'm out of breath at this point. 1034 to dispatch. Go ahead. Did you hear any of my calls for backup? Negative, 1034. You need unit? No, you can disregard. I had one subject on premise, but they're gone. I'm heading back to the station. So, of course, everyone asked me about what happened, and all I can say is they must have run out when they saw me. I didn't tell anyone the direction they ran left them absolutely no way of running outside. I began to wonder if I'm going crazy. I'm off Tuesday and Wednesday nights. Rookie, remember? So at this point, I just have one more night before I can rest. Monday night shift left me speechless. At roll call, everyone jokes about when I'm planning to go back to Patch Lane. I tell them that they can get the call, and I'm done. 300 hours. Dispatch to 1045. 1045 is my good friend who has been to the house in the 90s. 1045, go. We got a 911 hang-up for our Patch Lane. Sarge gave the okay to just drive by and make sure no one's there. 1045, show me en route. Not even 30 seconds go by, and my cell phone beeps. I have a text. Hey, want to meet me there? Bastard. Of course I'm not going to say no, so yeah, I go. 10:34 to dispatch. You can add me to 10:45's call. 10:04. We show up at the same time, and this time the front door is wide open again. Awesome. We both clear the first floor, then the top floor, and make our way into the basement together. Nothing. Then we turn the corner, and I see there is no lock on the metal door anymore. We look at each other, and he says, "I thought you said this was locked." I say, it was. So he slowly opens the door, and we are hit in the face with the most horrid smell. A smell I know well. The smell of death. We had a corpse of a young female, bloated, fresh. A body naturally bloats about 2 to 4 days after death and traps gases. That's where the odor comes from. We call for backup, and medical examiners show up on scene. They process the scene and begin to take the body away. I ask him, how long has the body been there? They are the experts, not me. And the ME guy says between 3 to 4 days based on rigor mortis. Livor mortis and a few other medical terms I probably can't even spell. I said there's no way for that to be possible because I was there a day ago and there was no way that was freshly locked. The lock was so corroded, rusted, covered in cobwebs. Nobody touched it in years. They say, "Officer Barkley, that isn't our job to explain. We're just telling you that this body has been laying in that exact position, in that room, for between 3 to 4 days. Tomorrow will be my first night back, and I'm not sure what to expect." The Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicles, Part 2, by Barkles 52. Update, Thursday, October 9th, 2018. I woke up this morning to a blaring ring coming from my nightstand. I smacked my alarm clock, but it didn't stop the noise. I finally realized, with half an eye open, that it was my phone ringing. I answered, "Hello?" "Barkley, wake the hell up. Chief wants to see you now." Ugh. Sergeant Oakley is not the voice you want to hear at 0800 hours in the morning. I rolled my ass out of bed and began to get ready to head into the station, since I knew it was never a good sign when good old Chief Fox wants you in his office ASAP. Around 0900 hours, I walked into the station, in uniform, and headed toward Chief Fox's office. I knocked on his open door and poked my head around the corner. Chief said, "Barkley, come in and shut the door." I shut the door and took a seat. "Well, Barkley, you shouldn't be surprised why you're here. You got dispatched to the same goddamn house for 4 nights in a row and discovered a dead body on the 4th night. Huh! And this is a body that had been there for at least 2 of the previous nights. You really effed up, Barkley. Now I have paperwork out the ass and you need to answer some questions." What the hell? How is he turning this thing on me? I did my job. I followed protocol. I followed my training, and I cleared the house as I was taught. "Okay, Chief, what questions do you have?" "Walk me through the first night. Did you check the windows, the doors?" "Yes, I checked the windows, which were all secure, and the front door was locked. There was no other door except the front door. It's a very old, small farmhouse." "All right. What about the second night? Windows, doors?" "Chief, I checked the windows, as my report said, and the second night the door was unlocked. I followed protocol and made entry." "And tell me about why you didn't check the room in the basement." "Well, according to Maryland versus Bowie, I conducted a person sweep of the home to check for any persons on the premises, since the property appeared abandoned. I looked in all the areas that a person could potentially hide. When I got to that room, I saw the lock was rusted, corroded, and covered in cobwebs. There was no way anyone could have hidden in that room and locked themselves inside. I was not searching for a crime or illegal substances. I was only legally allowed to search for persons in that residence. I know the effing law, Barkley. Thanks. Did you try the lock? Well, no. I could see that it could not have opened. Did you think to try and call one of your male officers to try and open the lock? Chief, the reason I didn't try to open it wasn't because I thought I was too weak. I didn't try to open it because I could tell it had not been touched in decades. Well, thanks to your expertise in locks and corrosion, this entire case is effed up thanks to you. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on you. Chief Fox, I followed all of our departmental procedures and stayed within the law. If you feel I handled these calls improperly, then please provide me the additional training and procedures that would guide me to know how I should have handled it. Nobody likes a smartass, Barkley. Go start your shift. You have a lot of follow-ups to do now for this case, and can't be doing that shit at night. What an asshole. I knew from the day the city council hired me that he hated me. Yeah, as I said, it's a small town, so the chief tends to do what the city council tells him to do. Lucky for me, city council was eager to hire another female officer, but I don't think Fox was on board with their idea. I'm used to sexism in these small towns, but I tolerate it since my fellow patrol officers, for the most part, don't share the chief's criticism. I decided to follow up with the medical examiner's office to see what information they had from the autopsy and the crime scene, since we didn't seem to have a copy of their report at our station. I called the medical chief examiner. Hey, it's Officer Barkley from Patch Lane case. Did you guys finish up the autopsy report? Yeah. Okay, I didn't see a copy here at the station. Can you send it over? I'm pretty busy right now, and plus, that's my assistant's job. All right, how about I swing by and pick it up? You can do whatever your little heart desires. The chief medical examiner wasn't exactly eager to help, but I grabbed my cruiser keys and headed over to the lab. The assistant was a young girl, looked fresh out of college, and greeted me with a smile. Hello, officer. How can I help you? I asked her for a copy of the ME's report from Patch Lane, and she proceeded to enter some letters into her computer, then hit print. She handed me the 3-page document, and so I asked, aren't there more pages? She responded, Nope, that's it. I found this very odd, considering most medical autopsy reports for a homicide case are well over 20 to 30 pages. I took a seat to look over the report and guessed my confusion and anger showed on my face, since the receptionist asked if there was a problem. As I reviewed the autopsy report, I saw that for the hair color, which was clearly long and blonde, they listed brunette, and for the eye color, they listed undetermined. I wish that this was the end of the shit show, but the entire report seemed to be either wrong or just incomplete. The manner of death was listed as homicide, but the cause of death was listed as undetermined. What the hell? Isn't that their job to determine the cause of death? I marched over to the chief medical examiner's office and knocked twice before walking in. Chief, this is just a skeleton report from the Patch Lane incident. I held up the 3-page document in my hands to show him. A skeleton report is just a basic report cops will fill out prior to the end of shift. and then the next day with fresh eyes they fill in the gaps. However, with a homicide case, and being that this is now 48 hours later, I didn't understand why they would only have a skeleton report. Nope, that's the finished report, sweetheart. I hate when creepy old men call me sweetheart. Well, why is there no cause of death listed? Because, thanks to you, the body sat in a locked room for 3 days and left us barely any evidence to work with. Why the hell is everyone blaming me for this? Then can you explain why the hair color was wrong and about half of these items are listed as undetermined? If you think you can do better, go right ahead. I asked to see the body. I wanted to make sure I wasn't just making shit up on my own head. Shockingly, he agreed and took me over to the freezer. Again, it's a small town, so the morgue has only about 5 bodies in the freezer. I found our Jane Doe from Patch Lane and zipped open the bag. I immediately noticed her blonde hair. I knew I wasn't crazy. I grabbed some latex gloves and began to go through her pockets to look for identification, since clearly the ME's office decided it was undetermined if she had items in her pocket. I found a receipt from a gas station for 10 gallons of gas, priced at $1.12 per gallon. I actually felt jealous of this dead woman, wondering where she found to get gas that cheap. Then I looked up at the top of the receipt and saw the date stamp of 10/20/1998. Why the hell would she keep a receipt that old? I flipped the receipt over and saw there was some type of writing, like in pencil, but I couldn't make it out. I put the receipt in a baggie and decided I was going to send it to the PA State Lab for further testing, to see if they could decipher what was written. The more I looked at her, I also noticed she was wearing bleached jeans with a multicolored sweatshirt, like what my mom used to dress me in when I was younger. I left the freezer since I could barely feel my own fingers, and I asked the chief medical examiner if he had copies of their attempt to identify the body, i.e. dental moldings, fingerprints, DNA tests, etc. He handed me over a stack of some papers and said, "Good luck." I asked, "Why are there only 6 fingerprints? Why didn't you do all 10 like normal?" He responded, "Well, why didn't you check the lock on the door while you were there 3 days ago? I don't tell you how to do your job, so why the hell are you trying to tell me to do mine?" Asshole. I decided I was going to redo her fingerprints, since the ones he handed me looked shitty and weren't even complete. He's usually more thorough than this, and I have no idea why it feels like I'm the only one even trying to solve this case anymore. I fingerprinted all 10 of our Jane Doe fingers and ran them through my mobile AFIS, automated fingerprint identification system. I was pleasantly surprised to see I got a hit, so I clicked See More, and on my screen read, Michelle Klein, date of birth, 7/5/1972, date of death, 10/20/1998. What the hell? The Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicle, Part 3, by Buckles 52. Update. Monday, August 13, 2018. I woke up Friday evening, groggy with a pounding headache. I'm beginning to think the bottle of wine I finished Thursday night wasn't such a great idea. The thing with cops, when we come across horrible scenes that we can't rationalize or explain, whether it be murdered children, abusive husbands, finding a 20-year dead body. We turned to alcohol. Me personally, I turned to a nice dark Merlot. I could not stop wondering how the hell that body could have died 20 years ago. It was fresh. I could still smell it. It made absolutely no sense. I grabbed my keys with my left hand as I wedged my right hand fingers between my duty belt and uniform belt to get my last belt keeper snapped in place before running out the door to make it to roll call on time. While driving to the station, all I could think about was how there was no way my mobile AFIS was correct. I decided that as soon as roll call ended, I was going to grab a different mobile AFIS from the Batcave, the not-so-creative name we call the room with all of our tools, gadgets, and weapons, and scan my Jane Doe's fingerprints again. As soon as roll call was over, I ran upstairs and grabbed Jane Doe's fingerprints from the case file. Next, I grabbed one of the newer mobile AFIS devices and scanned Jane Doe's fingerprints. It was running slow, but seemed to be thinking. The screen read, processing, processing, processing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, but in reality was maybe 3 minutes, I got the message. System timed out. Failed attempt. Weird. This has never happened to me before. I decided to try again. This time I can actually feel my heart start to thump louder and louder as I wait for the results. Processing. Processing. No results found. What the hell? Are you effing kidding me? When I scan a suspect's fingerprints who's never been before arrested. I didn't tell anyone about my previous Michelle Klein results because it didn't make any sense to me. I worried something exactly like this would happen, and I would look like the crazy one. Before I could jump on one of the computers to start doing some digging, I heard the tone drop. The tone is the loud, high-pitched, screaming tone that makes every cop's heart skip a beat. Dispatch to all available units. We just received a call for gunshots fired near the McDonald's. The caller is unsure of where the shooting occurred, but heard 3 gunshots, followed by screeching tires and someone yelling. I ran to my cruiser, flipped the switch to turn on my lights and sirens, and raced to the scene. We circulated the area for over an hour with no results. Finally, dispatch got back on the air. Dispatch to all units. We just received a call from the hospital that they have a gunshot wound patient and would like an officer to respond. Sergeant Oakley was kind enough to offer the rookies assistance. And just like that, I spent the rest of my night sitting at the hospital, waiting for the victim to come out of surgery so that I could question him. I spent all Friday night thinking about our Jane Doe case and trying to find answers. But the more I thought about the case, the more questions I had. When I returned to work Saturday, I decided to wait to return to Patch Lane and try to get some closure to some of my unanswered questions. After everything that happened, I realized it would be best for me not to go alone. I texted my friend, Tim. He is badge number 1045, who responded last time with me, and asked if he would be willing to head back over to Patch Lane with me under the radar. He agreed, and we both advised dispatch to hold us out doing foot patrol around the park. This is an area we've had a lot of problems at night, with underage drinking and smoking. I rolled my cruiser to a stop and shut off the engine. Tim slowly forced himself out of his cruiser, muttering about his bad back. "Barkley, what are we even looking for back here?" "Anything, Tim. I just don't think the ME's office processed the scene properly based on how they handled the body." "What are you talking about?" "Shit. I didn't tell him about my little visit to the ME's office." "Nothing. Let's start out and do a full sweep of the perimeter." I wasn't really sure what I was even expecting. There was still police tape across the front door, with a fire red sticker on the seal of the doorway stamped, "Do not enter." I leaned in to check the door handle to make sure it was locked. As I reached down, I heard a loud, shrill scream come from immediately behind me. I jumped up and turned around and shined my flashlight straight ahead. Nobody was there. I heard a much softer, quieter squeal come from ground level. I redirected my light downward, and sitting in front of me was a Halloween black cat. "Jesus, Cat, what the hell are you screaming at me for?" Now that she had my attention, she came up to me and wrapped her body around my leg, purring. I proceeded to check the rest of the windows and worked my way to the rear of the house, towards Tim. Haley, yes, I named her, followed me and began frantically meowing at me the closer I got to the rear of the house. Her screaming got so bad I had to throw her some crackers from my pocket just to distract her. It worked. I noticed a shadow in the upper level window but couldn't make out what it was. I began taking steps backwards to get a better view through the upper level window, all while shining my flashlight upward. By about my 7th or 8th step back, I felt something hard and sharp whack into the back of my ankle and brought me to my knees. Tim came running over, since this time I was the one doing the yelling and not Haley. He shined his light down to make sure I was okay. Thank God there was no blood and I seemed to be fine. I bent over to see what it was that I felt go into my ankle, and I felt a rusted, sharp chunk of metal. It was an old root cellar door handle. Root cellars are not uncommon on these old farms. It was a way for the farmers to store their harvest over the long winter months when refrigeration was non-existent. "What the hell is that?" Tim asked. "It's a root cellar door," I told him. "We need to see what's down there." We opened the door, and I used my ASP baton to wrap all of the spiderwebs around it and cleared a path for us. "Barkley, you're freaking going first." I shined my light down and began going down one step at a time. I went slowly so as to not fall through one of those old wooden stairs. We walked down what could only be described as a tunnel for only about 10 seconds before we reached a small set of stairs. There were about 4 steps up that led to a smaller hatch, almost like an attic door, one that you must crawl through without a ladder. I reached up and opened the hatch. I popped my head up and shined my light around. There was a large rug over the hatch opening. Tim helped me push it out of the way. Once we could finally see in the room, I recognized it. It was the room we found Jane Doe. Tim grabbed my arm and convinced me we needed to leave because this house was still an active crime scene and we couldn't go walking around inside. We finally figured out how the body got in that room. I knew I wasn't crazy. There was no way anyone had touched that lock on the outside. We turned around and retraced our steps, careful not to disturb anything. Along the way, I tried to look for evidence, but it was too dark. It was an area that would be better examined during daylight. We returned to our cruisers and calmed our nerves over a long smoke break. despite the fact I'm not even a smoker. I got home, passed out, and went back into work on Sunday. One thing I love about working weekends is there's no brass at the station when I go to work. However, this day was different. As soon as I walked in the station, I overheard my coworkers talking about some suits that were up in the chief's office. Sergeant Oakley saw me and immediately snapped his fingers at me. "Barkley, get over here. Chief got called in today because of a surprise visit from some suits. He wants you in his office immediately." I headed upstairs to the chief's office, a little surprised that the feds were getting involved in this case. I began to wonder if the FBI got involved because of a potential serial killer. My thoughts were quickly interrupted by Chief Fox. "Barkley, get your ass in here." Oh, the wonderful sound of his voice. "Hello, Chief. How can I help?" "Barkley, the marshals got called in to help with this case." The U.S. Marshals? They usually go after fugitives. Do they think a fugitive did this to our Jane Doe? Do they think our Jane Doe is a fugitive? My mind is going 100 miles per minute. Chief Fox then told me I had to sit down with them and answer any and all questions that they had. I took a seat and walked them through my past week, explaining the 911 hang-ups and finding the body. I wasn't planning to give them any details about the fingerprints, Michelle Klein, or the secret door. But they asked me something that sparked my interest. "Officer Barkley, are you familiar with the U.S. Marshals Witness Protection Program?" The Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicles, Part 4, by Barkles 52. Update, Tuesday, August 14th, 2018. My conversation with the U.S. Marshals left me speechless. It seemed like every time a question was answered, it created 10 more questions. My Jane Doe was in the Witness Protection Program? Why? Why would she risk her life by coming back here? Who wanted her killed? The U.S. Marshals were extremely professional, polished, and appeared as though they wanted to help. They weren't willing to divulge any specifics or details of why Jane Doe was put into the program, or why she may have been killed. They did tell me that she was a key witness to a very high-profile case years ago involving the ATF. They also admitted that Michelle Klein was her real name. However, they faked her death upon entry of the protection program. Whenever I ran her fingerprints through AFIS, it triggered an alert in their system, and that's how they came to be standing in front of me. Before I could ask any questions, they shook my hand and thanked me for my time. They walked out the door before I could even get a why out of my mouth. Who killed Michelle Klein? Who kept calling 911? What did this poor woman get herself into? Why was there a receipt in her pocket from 20 years ago? I finished the rest of my shift, completing paperwork, which I eventually faxed over to the suits. I went home early Monday morning and only had 2 glasses of wine before rolling into bed by 0500 hours. Don't be mistaken. It's not that I didn't want to drink an entire bottle again, but I was just too tired. Monday evening, I headed back towards the station for roll call, which started at 1700 hours. Sergeant Oakley read and summarized aloud the prior shift's reports before releasing us to hit the road. Before I can finish ranking my cruiser, Dispatch calls. Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead. 1034, we just got a call from a senior citizen who is currently at her neighbor's house. She is a medical alert customer and oxygen dependent. Her phone lines are currently not working and is requesting to speak with an officer. 1034, show me en route. Although there isn't much an officer can do with a call such as this, we are obligated to respond if someone calls and requests to see an officer. I drive down the long country road towards the caller and can't help but glance to my right as I pass Patch Lane sign. I arrive on the scene and meet with the sweetest old woman who reminded me of my own grandmother. She explained to me that she walked into her neighbor's house and called the phone company about her phones not working, but just wanted an officer to keep her company until her phones were fixed, since she was oxygen dependent. She also shared that she has already had more than one fall in her home and used her medical alert. I told her I was happy to wait with her. She lived in an older farmhouse. There are many of those in this area. Had one of the prettiest farmlands I'd seen in a while. She had her garden filled with colorful flowers and cute lawn ornaments throughout. She caught me staring and said, "Oh yes, my daughter comes by every week to help keep my garden looking so pretty. Her husband mows the lawn for me and she tends to the flowers." I was shocked to see the local phone company drive down the gravel road within 30 minutes of my arrival. I went outside to greet the technician and explained the problem. He introduced himself as Tom and asked me where the box was located. As quickly as I could repeat the question in my head, I heard the older woman yell from the porch, "It's behind the shed." I followed Tom behind the shed, and about 20 yards away I saw a large 3-foot square pole sticking out of the ground. Tom walked over to it and began reaching on his belt for some tools. "What is that?" I asked. "This is the box that connects her telephone line, as well as her neighbor lines, to the central telephone system. I'm going to see if there's a problem with the wires making the connections." He attempts to open the hinge. No luck. These things usually go months, maybe years without being opened and take a little TLC to open. There we go. The front face opened after just a little bit of elbow grease was put into it. I saw several wires and some labels next to the wires, containing a series of numbers. "So, explain to me what's going on here," I asked. "Well, these boxes were put here way before your time. They had to install these when the landlines first became a thing. You see these wires and the numbers after them? They show to which address each wire is associated." I noticed a loose wire hanging from the bottom with no label. This one appeared to have a female attachment on the end. I asked, "And what is that wire made to connect to?" "Oh, that's so we can plug our phones into it and make phone calls and test the lines." "Wait, what? You can carry a phone in your pocket, plug it in, and make a call from a box?" Tom laughed and explained, "Well, it isn't exactly that simple. You need certain types of phone, but yeah, I guess kind of like that." "What phone number would show up when you called someone from a box?" "Whichever neighbor line you selected up here." He motioned to the labels and switches. It was then that I had a light bulb moment. What if my 911 hang-up on Patch Lane were being done by one of these boxes? I asked, "So if a house has no electricity, no phone, could it still show up as the origin of a phone call if someone called from a box?" Tom paused for a moment to think about it and responded, I guess. Yeah, I mean, that's possible. As long as a telephone line has not been reassigned to another person. Tom finished up his work and was able to get the phones working again. I left the scene within the hour, so it was still light outside. I decided to head back to Patch Lane in the daylight to see if I could find one of these landline telephone poles. I arrived on scene and began walking through the acreage. After about 20 minutes, I found it. I leaned over and wrapped my 2 fingers inside the front panel and pulled. The door opened with ease, much unlike the last box I just watched Tom open. Someone had opened this box recently, but who? As I started to head back towards my cruiser, I heard screaming. God damn it, Haley. I turned around and saw Haley sitting by the front porch. This time she looked in pain. She was holding her front paw in the air and kept licking at it, screaming in pain. I got closer to her and saw that her paw looked incredibly swollen. I'm an animal lover, so I decided to wrap her in an old uniform shirt I had in my trunk and set her in my cruiser. I grabbed my phone from my front vest pocket and Googled local veterinarians. I was pretty damn surprised to see my family's old vet was showing as still open and in business. We had a black lab growing up that I swear was the most intelligent dog. Dr. DeMeyer's was just down the road and open until 8, or 2000 hours as I interpreted it. I glanced at my watch and saw it was already 1940, so I rushed down the road to the vet. Dr. DeMeyer immediately took us in and began examining her paw. I couldn't believe this guy was still alive, let alone still working. I remembered him being old when I was just a kid. He has to be in his 80s by now. My dad used to always take our dog to him, and I remember he would call Dr. DeMeyer's the mayor because he knew everyone in this town and knew everything about them. For as much as my dog hated the vet, I swear my dad loved going there to shoot the shit with Dr. DeMeyer's. So where did you find this cat, officer? Down on Patch Lane at an abandoned farmhouse. She was sitting on the front porch crying in pain. I couldn't just leave her there. Ah, yes. I haven't heard about Patch Lane in quite a while. Oh, are you familiar with that house? I asked. I don't know if I would say that. I just remember the stories that circulated the town way back when. He stopped to write down some notes in the chart. He looked up and said, "That was a beautiful farm. I remember taking care of the cows on old Wentz's farm when the Goods lived there." Did you know the guy that lived there after the Goods passed? Oh, never knew him. Only heard many stories. What stories? Well, that fella was a jack of all trades, you could say. He dipped his hand into just about every illegal scheme you could think of. I heard rumors that he had ties to the mafia. That guy was blonde-haired and blue-eyed and yet supposedly Italian. Now you explain that to me, officer. Never did understand it, but I suspect he was given something or providing something to them. Very odd character. I never heard about the owner of Patch Lane until just now. Where is he now? I asked. Oh, he left town quite a few years ago. Never did see him again. Ah, well, anywho. Here's some penicillin you're going to have to give to Haley for the next 5 days. This will help clear up her abscess to make sure the infection doesn't get any worse. If it does get worse, call my office. Wait, what the hell? I'm going to have to give her medicine? So now I have a cat? I'm more of a dog person, but I can't stomach the idea of dropping her off at the local shelter either. Oh, on my way home, I stopped at the local mart and picked up a litter box, some cat litter, and cat food. At least cats are lower maintenance and more independent than dogs. Haley decided to snuggle up next to me for the night, and I'll admit it was the best I'd slept in months. I woke up Tuesday morning and decided to make it a productive day, despite the fact that my day off from work and I'm exhausted. I began to think who would have more information on Patch Lane or Michelle Klein. All of my thoughts came back to the same person, my dad. He was on the force back in the 90s. Hell, he was on the force back in the 80s and 70s. I drove over to his house and pulled into the driveway. I saw the rose bush in bloom at the front of the house, and it instantly reminded me of my mom. She passed away a few years back, but every time I go to my dad's, I find pieces of her everywhere, such as a rose bush that she planted. I welcomed myself inside and was greeted with the best bear hug. After feeding me and fueling me with his famous super secret recipe coffee, we sat down. Dad, have you ever been to the house on Patch Lane? Oh, wow. Yes, I have. Many, many years ago. Really? What were you there for? The ATF needed a couple of uniformed officers to assist with the gathering evidence for a case. They busted the owner of that place for smuggling in illegal guns, and he had them stored in a shed on the farm. What? I've been researching this place for over a week and have never heard of an ATF raid. Well, that's because it was confidential. We never wrote a police report on the incident. It was solely documented on the federal level, and they were very good about keeping it out of the media. We didn't have space phones back then, so it was much easier to keep this under wraps. Do you know what happened to the owner? Who was he? His name was Joseph? Yeah, Joseph. Joseph Mueller, I believe. It was similar to Miller, but not quite Miller. And what happened to him? Right. Well, he had an inside mole with the police department and caught wind of the raid. He flew the coop, and we never really got an update since then. I began to wonder why Tim didn't tell me any of this. Dad, I've been dispatched to Patch Lane several times with Tim, and he didn't tell me any of this. Do you know why he wouldn't tell me about it? Well, Tim didn't join the department until 97? Maybe 1998. This all happened around 95, about 2 years before then. Well, that made me feel a little better. I felt guilty for insinuating that I was questioning Tim. My dad began to ask me questions about my own calls to Patch Lane. But I made the dash to the front door and told him I had to get going because of Haley. And I simply told him I'd taken in a stray who was still healing. I hadn't heard back from the PA State Lab yet, so I called them to get an update on what was written on the back of the receipt I found in Michelle's pocket. The receptionist answered the phone. State Forensics Department. Hello, this is Officer Barkley following up on case number 2018, redacted. I wanted to check the status of my evidence. The receptionist transferred me. A male answered. Hello, Officer Barkley. Sorry, we've been so busy and I did not get a chance to call you sooner. We were successful in extracting the writing on the back of the receipt you provided to us. It reads, L34, R16, L8. What does that even read? I can't say for certain what it means, but in my personal opinion, this definitely looks like a combination to a safe. So, the Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicles, Part 5. Update, Wednesday, August 15th, 2018. I became obsessed with trying to figure out where a safe could possibly be on Patch Lane. I woke up early Tuesday morning and threw some food in a bowl for Haley before racing out of my house. "Don't worry, Haley. Mommy will be home later." She meowed goodbye in response, brushed along my leg, and trotted over to the couch to curl up and wait for my return. It's so damn hard to leave her now. She filled a void in my heart I didn't know existed. I headed over to my dad's. I didn't call him ahead of time since he lives just down the road, and I stopped in all the time. As I was pulling up, I saw Tim's truck parked in Dad's driveway. Not very surprising since they're good friends, and today's Tim's day off as well, so they tend to catch up on Tuesdays or Wednesdays over a cigar on the back deck. I was actually really glad Tim was there because I had some more questions I wanted to run by him as well. My dad greeted me with his famous bear hug, and Tim gave me a nod of the head and smiled. "How's it going?" "Hey, I'm actually glad you guys are both here. I wanted to ask you both about Patch Lane." Tim chimed in. "Jesus, see what I'm talking about? Your girl is obsessed with this case now. Chip off the old block, am I right?" My dad laughed. Oh, I remember those days of obsessing over cases. I gotta say, retirement has treated me well. I welcomed myself back into the conversation. Okay, well, maybe there's a reason to be obsessed. I just talked to the state's forensic lab, and it looks like Michelle had written a code to a safe on the back of that receipt that she kept in her pocket. I think there's a safe somewhere on Patch Lane, and it could have some answers for me. Tim took a long inhale of his cigar, held it, and slowly released. "You're going to make me go back there, aren't you?" I flashed him a smile and offered, "Well, I could go alone." Tim agreed, and my dad laughed at him and remarked, "Yeah, she does that shit to me too, Tim. Good luck with that." I added, "Tim, I also wanted to ask you about the 911 hang-ups you used to respond to back when you were a rookie. What else do you remember about the tenant?" Tim thought for a moment and replied, "Well, she was certainly a pretty young thing. She had 2 very young children. Neither could talk yet, I bet, so they were under 2. She looked young herself, too. I would suspect she was maybe around 20 years old, if that. Just had that baby face, you know. Anywho, she was very curious about the house and the locked door in the basement. Most people hated when the cops showed up, but she always seemed, I don't know, relieved. She had mentioned how big that house was and how she always felt like someone was watching her. Even the tenants after her made similar comments. I always chalked it up to being the history of that Wentz farm, you know? Tim, is there any chance that the woman we found in that basement was the same girl that lived there?" "I don't know why that would be. I always thought she moved somewhere else because right after she left, a new tenant came in. I guess I don't know exactly what happened to her." "Do you remember her name?" "Oh, God, I'm awful with names. I'll never forget a face, but I can't remember names. You know that. That's why I immediately write every person's name down that we interview. I can't even check anywhere since I never took a report for checking her house." "Could her name have been Michelle Klein?" Uh, Honestly, I don't know. It could have been, but I have no idea. That was 20 years ago. I turned to my dad. "Dad, what do you know about the tenants of that house in the late 90s? He looked nervously down at his cigar and took a short puff. "Well, I remember all of the tenants were similar." "What do you mean?" "Like they look similar." "Dad, this is important. Tell me what you're trying to spit out." He took a deep breath. Well, all of the tenants were young, attractive women. They were mostly blonde from out of town. The type of girls that your mother would not have liked me stopping to talk to at the grocery store, if you catch my drift. Wait, are you saying you think they were prostitutes? No. I just mean they were young, pretty, and kind of ditzy, you know? I wasn't sure what to make of this information, but I let Tim finish his cigar before we headed into the station. We were scheduled off for Tuesday, but given this new information, I requested and was granted to come in and work overtime to follow up. I remember that Tim used to go to the beach and come back with old coins and whatnot that he would find using his metal detector. I asked him if he could bring his metal detector to Patch Lane with him this evening to help us find the safe. After we broke from roll call, we immediately headed to Patch Lane. The scene was done being processed, so we walked through the front door. We went up to the master bedroom and tried every floorboard, every inch of the wall, looking for where a safe could be hidden. We were unsuccessful. We mutually decided to try the basement before the rest of the house. We worked our way into the room where we found Michelle's body. There were some scenes you just won't forget. That was one. Her body was purple, swollen, and unrecognizable as human. The only way I even identified her as a young woman was based on the long blonde hair and the clothes she had on. Tim ran his metal detector along the cement wall, and we heard beep, beep. Tim continued to move it along to the left. Beep, 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 beep. We looked at each other for a moment before he dropped his metal detector, and we grabbed at the wall. I didn't even know what we were grabbing at, but we kept feeling along the wall. As I pushed along the wall, a block moved. I grabbed my knife from my pocket, and Tim grabbed his as well. We shoved our knives along the cement brick and eased it out from the wall. There it was, the safe. It was an old-fashioned turn-dial lock, the kind I used to have on my high school locker. Drawing on my memory, I cleared the lock before trying the combination. I spun it to the left, stopping at 34, spun it 2 times to the right, stopping at 16, spun it back to the left, and stopped at 8. Click. I went to open the door. Tim's eyes and mine locked on the safe, and then I heard another click. But this wasn't like the unlocking of the safe. This was familiar. It was the cocking of a revolver. I turned around and was faced with the barrel of a gun. Well, you pigs just can't stay away from my house. He had blonde hair, although the gray was taking over, and piercing blue eyes. You're as bad as that bitch who couldn't keep her mouth shut. You know, I let her live here because she appeared cute and dumb. Her curiosity is what got her killed, just like what I'm going to do to the 2 of you. The problem with facing a gun is, no matter how fast I could grab my gun, he would have still been able to pull his trigger faster. However, there are other options. I slowly walked towards our killer, hands in the air, level with my shoulders, and asked, "You're Joseph, aren't you?" "Yeah, and you're dead." As he finished his sentence, my nose was nearly touching the barrel of his gun. I grabbed the barrel, twisting it to his right, making a full 360-degree circle. I heard his pointer finger snap as it got tangled in the trigger and broke. I had his gun pointed it right back at him. "Get on the fucking ground." He slowly raised his hands in the air and got on his right knee, and then his left. Tim ran behind Joseph and placed him in handcuffs. Once the scene was under control, we called for backup. As officers arrived on the scene, so did the suits. The 2 suits from earlier in the week came down, and Tim and I recounted the evening events. It was at this point I realized we still didn't get to see what was inside the safe. I walked over and opened the door. I grabbed a handful of papers and pulled them out. They were photographs. Tim instantly said, "That's her. That's the girl. Like I said, I never forget a face. That's just names." The suits looked at him and said, "That's Michelle Klein. Your body and our witness." I took a deep inhale and released it with a long sigh. "Can you please tell us what the hell went on here?" The suits looked at each other, and the older one nodded his head. "All right, so your Mr. Joseph Mueller here was into some deep stuff. Most predominantly, he ran illegal guns and sold them to some big names, including the Mafia. The ATF thought they'd gotten everything during their raid years ago, but there are so many hidden passages, tunnels, and root cellars throughout this property and land, he kept hiding them somewhere new. Trust us, if you knew about the tunnels and passages you are literally standing on right now, you'd have nightmares for years." The suits took a sip of his coffee and continued. "He used the tenants as a cover-up and targeted tenants who he thought wouldn't ask any questions and would be fine with sending checks addressed to cash to a P.O. box as their monthly rent checks. What he didn't expect was for Michelle Klein to start asking questions and go digging through this house. She stumbled across one of his root cellars where he stored guns, called the feds immediately. She didn't know if she could trust the local police at that point and went straight to the ATF. ATF contacted us and said they knew Mueller and knew that if he found out what she needed, she'd be dead. So they sent her to us to protect her. Part of her protection meant we needed to fake her death so that Mueller wouldn't be suspicious and go looking for her. She refused initially, but when we explained to her that her children's lives were at risk too, she agreed." He looked towards the safe and continued, "It looks like she used this safe here to store old family photographs and their birth certificates as proof of their existence. We told her she had to leave all of this behind. She couldn't take any evidence with her of her previous life or her children. This all happened on October 20th, 1998. Looks like she wrote down the safe code on the first piece of paper she could find and kept it after all these years. We received notification about 2 weeks ago that her son was diagnosed with cancer. Damn cancer. Kid was only 22 years old and had a brain tumor. She kept on telling us she wanted to see him, and we explained to her why that wasn't possible. And we told her he probably would not recognize her. Looks like she did her best to try and look as close as she did 20 years ago, including her clothing, so that he would recognize her. She probably wanted to grab these photographs to show him to prove that she was his mother and jog his memory. When she was here, Joseph must have seen her from one of his tree stands and wanted to silence her. She was one of the only witnesses willing to go forward with testimony. We just could never catch him after all these years." I responded, "Well, I hope this entire case can be closed now." The suits responded, "Yeah, I don't think you should be getting any more 911 hang-ups from that house." I processed what they just said and asked, "Yeah, wait, who was the one making those phone calls then?" They responded, "We can't disclose that information, but you can think of them as good Samaritans who had eyes everywhere and wanted to see justice done." We headed back to the station, where I started the never-ending paperwork process. Now that we were more secluded, I grabbed one of the suits and decided to tell him about my experience at the medical examiner's office. I began to think he was involved and it was something they needed to know. He stopped me and said, "This is actually something the ME wanted to talk to you himself about. Hold on." The suit came back with the ME, and he extended his hand to shake mine. I was confused by the gesture, but shook his hand. "Officer Barkley, I just want to say what a fantastic job you did on this case. I also want to apologize in person for how I acted and how I handled this case. I received an anonymous threat that if I performed an autopsy or did anything at all with the body, my family was going to be killed. They even knew my daughter's school and her schedule. I'm so sorry. I was afraid to go to the authorities out of fear for my family. I'm so glad to see you stuck to your guns and saw this case through." Dispatch interrupted. "Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead. Are you able to respond to a 911 hang-up?" Affirmative. What's the address? The Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicles. I'm a cop, and I got another 911 hang-up, Part 1, by Barkles 52. In case you don't know, I'm a rookie cop in a small, rural Pennsylvania town, currently stuck working the night shift. I work your normal patrol shift, driving around, pulling traffic, responding to your usual domestic disputes and whatever other wonderful calls dispatch sends my way. Last week was crazy at work for me. And right as I thought life was returning to normal, I now find myself in the eye of yet another unsettling investigation. I woke up early afternoon to a purring on my chest. Haley. This cat has become the love of my life since we found each other about a week ago. However, I could do without my new vibrating alarm clock. I gave her a few scratches before guiding her off my chest. I glanced at the clock and saw it was already 1300 hours. I got out of bed, showered, and slowly began preparing to go in for work that night. I put on my uniform, geared up, and headed out the door. Roll call was pretty short and sweet since we were getting busy, and Sergeant Oakley wanted bodies on the road as soon as possible. Right before breaking, Sergeant Oakley made sure to add, "And Barkley, try not to have another shitstorm follow you, yeah?" "Yeah, Sarge. I was going to try and make a shitstorm, but now that you told me not to, I guess I won't. I might be one of the very few females in the department, but most of the guys appreciate my thick skin and sarcasm." I was in the middle of a conversation when dispatch interrupted me. "Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead. Are you able to respond to a 911 hang-up?" Affirmative. What's the address? Redacted. Old School Road. Show me en route. I racked my cruiser and headed towards the house. Every time someone calls 911 and hangs up, we are obligated to respond if dispatch is unable to call back and speak with someone. As the rookie, I'm quite familiar with responding to these hang-ups. A little too familiar. I turned down the gravel road, kicking up dust in my Taurus's path. I stopped a few yards away from the old log cabin and approached quietly. To my surprise, there was an elderly woman sitting in her floral chair, watching television. I didn't see anyone else in the house, so I approached and knocked. "Officer Barkley with the redacted Police department. Please come to the front door." The woman slowly raised herself from her chair and held on to her walker. She came to the front door and greeted me.
"Hello there, officer. Is there something wrong?"
"Ma'am, is everything all right? We received a 911 hang-up from this residence," she responded.
"Oh, yes, everything's fine here, officer. It was probably just my husband."
I became more alert and instantly asked, "Where is your husband? I need to go check and make sure he's all right then." She shrugged her shoulders and pointed towards the fireplace.
"He's right there, officer."
I looked to where she was pointing, but nobody was there. I became concerned. "Ma'am, I don't see your husband. Can you please tell me what room he's in?" She slowly walked over to the mantel and pointed to the center.
"He's here, officer."
She pointed to an urn. "Oh, I see him now. I'm sorry for your loss." I wasn't sure what the response to that was going to be, but I knew that it was important not to mislead her and pretend that he was still alive.
"Why, yes, thank you. Saying sorry is such an odd tradition, don't you think? I mean, I know you aren't the reason he died. Anywho, I'm sorry that you came out for that. Ever since Samuel passed a few months back, he's been messing with the wires. He turns the lights on and off, and I get phone calls saying they are returning my call, but I never called them. I guess it's his way of letting me know he's still here with me."
I don't really believe in the paranormal, but that doesn't mean it doesn't freak me out. I gave the woman a heartfelt smile and reached out my hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't get to formally introduce myself. I'm Sarah Barkley. Please feel free to call me Sarah."
"Oh, hi, Sarah. I'm Rose. It's nice to meet you. Again, I'm sorry you got called out here for nothing. I'm sure you have much more important places to be."
"No, it's quite all right. This is an important call to me. However, per my department's protocol, I need to check your home and make sure there isn't anyone else in here who could have made that call. Is that all right?"
"Oh, yes, of course. I understand. I'll just sit out here. I've been home all day, though. There certainly isn't anyone here but me."
She settled back into her chair and continued watching her television as if I wasn't even there. I started to check the first floor of the cabin. I cleared the kitchen, then the family room, and made my way to the master bedroom. I made sure to check every closet and everywhere a person could physically fit to hide. First floor was clear, so I headed to the basement. I saw an old workbench covered in different machines and tools used for loading ammunition. I know these items quite well since it's a hobby my dad has had for years. Everything was covered in dust and looked as though loading ammunition was an old hobby of Samuel's. I could see he had an assortment of empty, clean shells lined up on a tray, as if he were preparing to load them. He had a very fine antique loading press that I know would have made my dad jealous. I wondered if Rose knew the value of these antiques. As I made my way down his workbench, I was impressed with his organization and tidiness. It was all set up, ready for him to return to work at any moment. I glanced towards the corner of the cellar door, where I saw his jacket hanging on a single hook. I began to wonder if Rose had been waiting for him to come home after all these months. I made my way around to the laundry room and finally headed back upstairs after clearing the basement, wedging my duty belt between the stair railing and the chairlift that Rose had installed. I made my way upstairs and walked through the family room to another set of stairs,
leading to the second-floor loft. I slowly walked up the stairs and opened the door to the loft bedroom. I could smell the stale air from a room that clearly had not been used in years. I checked the closet and under the bed. Nothing. Right as I went to leave, I noticed a small cubbyhole in the corner behind the door. Again, I had to check anywhere that a person might possibly hide, so I opened the cubby door with my left hand, holding my gun in my right. The storage space was pitch black. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it. The cubby space was nearly empty except for an old lamp, a wooden sled, and an old trunk with brass locks. When I looked at the trunk, every hair on the back of my neck stood up, and goosebumps covered my arms. My intuition has saved my life many times, so I have learned to follow it. I slowly crawled through the cubby, making my way towards the trunk. I opened the lid and found a trunk full of various items. No person hiding in there. I released an audible sigh of relief. My intuition has saved my life many times, so I have learned to follow it. I slowly crawled through the cubby, making my way towards the trunk. I opened the lid and found a trunk full of various items. No person hiding in there. I released an audible sigh of relief. I decided to drag this trunk out of the cubby, especially since I knew Rose was unable to walk up those stairs. And I thought maybe this would be something she'd like to know about. I hollered over the loft railing. "Rose, there's an old trunk in this cubby hole. Did you know that was up here?" Rose replied, "What? What trunk?" I decided to carry it down to her to let her look through it. I set it down at her feet and opened it. I could see it much clearer now that we were in the light. There were old newspaper clippings, photographs, and old clothing. One photograph in particular caught Rose's eye. She leaned over and picked up the photograph, caressing the edges. She began to cry, and my immediate response was to comfort her. "Oh, Rose, I'm so sorry. What's wrong?" She sat and cried for a few moments. When she was able to answer, she said, "It's a photograph of my granddaughter. I not only lost her once, I lost her twice. Sometimes the pain is just too much to bear." I asked. Rose responded, "Don't you know, honey? My granddaughter was Michelle Klein, the woman the police found in Patch Lane House."
The Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicles, Part 7 by Barkles 52. I couldn't control my facial expression as my jaw dropped. "Wait, Michelle Klein was your granddaughter?" I knew I was repeating what she just said, but I was still processing this piece of information. "Yes, you look surprised. Were you one of the officers who found her?" "Oh, Rose, yes, I was. I'm so sorry for your loss. I guess I always thought she was more of a transient and had no idea that she had family left in the area." "Well, I think I'm the only family left here. Michelle's children went to live with their aunt, my daughter, down in Maryland, after we believed she died 20 years ago." I knew Michelle's children were in Maryland because the U.S. Marshals told me they were going to drive down personally to notify her children and tell them how their mother was in a witness protection program all these years. I had so many questions for Rose now. I tried to pace myself. "What was your relationship with Michelle like?"
She was less like a granddaughter and more like a daughter to me. I love Michelle's mother very much. She is my daughter, but she has her flaws. She became heavily involved with the Catholic Church when she married Michelle's father. So when Michelle came home and told them she was pregnant and going to be raising a child alone, they kicked her out of their house. I don't think it was even 6 months before they ended up moving out west to be closer to Alan's family. Alan? Yes, Michelle's father.
Oh, sorry. So what did Michelle do when they kicked her out?
She had nowhere to go. Samuel and I took her in and helped her through her pregnancy. It wasn't too long after the first one was born that she was pregnant again. We let her stay here, though, her second pregnancy as well. Oh, God, then the accident happened.
What accident?
Michelle was driving down the road to work. She was a waitress and got hit head-on by a drunk driver. She was 7 months pregnant, and we didn't know if either of them were going to make it. I think that night took years off my life.
I cringed as the scene of the accident ran through my mind. Oh, that is so terrifying.
Yes, it was, Rose replied. As I'm sure you can figure out, they both made it. They performed an emergency cesarean section, and Michelle suffered a severe brain injury. But with therapy and the right doctors, she made a full recovery.
I was dying to know how Michelle ended up at Patch Lane. And when did she move out of your home?
Oh, let me see. Probably about 10 months after the accident. I know it wasn't a full year yet. She ended up starting her own business and made more than twice what she made as a waitress.
Being that this is such a small town, everyone knows who owns each local business. I was surprised to hear Michelle started her own business. I'd never heard of her or her business. What business did she start? Rose's eyes widened slightly and she inhaled deeply.
Well now, that's an interesting story that might take us a while.
I was so engrossed in Rose's information, I leaned closer. I have time, Rose.
All right. Well, after Michelle's accident, she didn't feel the same. She started experiencing strange things no one could explain.
I wasn't sure where Rose was going with this.
Like medically? No, not like that. She started having thoughts, memory-like thoughts that weren't really memories and had never happened to her. She would be confused on why she randomly had that thought, and then within a day's notice, her vision would come true.
This conversation was not going where I thought it was. However, I was still intrigued, and I could tell Rose felt embarrassed because she knew how all of this sounded. Rose continued.
I know how this all must sound. If it weren't for seeing it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it either.
I couldn't help myself and asked, what exactly did you see with your own eyes?
I'll never forget her first vision. We were all in the family room playing cards and unwinding since she got home from work. Out of nowhere, she started crying. At first, I thought it was hormones since it wasn't that long after her second child. She said she didn't know why she was crying, but quickly started rocking back and forth in her seat. She kept repeating, no, 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 this isn't happening. This isn't real. I started crying just at the sight of her. Samuel had no idea whether he should console her or sit back. He just stared in disbelief. I held her for nearly 20 minutes until she could finally speak. She said someone she loved was dead. I assured her everyone is okay, but she just kept saying, someone's dead.
I had goosebumps up my arms. So what happened?
We finally got her calmed down and put her to bed. It wasn't even 7 a.m. when I woke up to the phone ringing. Samuel answered it, and I'll never forget his face. I never have seen so much pain in his eyes as that very moment. He slowly lowered the phone and grabbed my hand. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me Mary, Michelle's sister, overdosed last night.
I had no words, no response. Suddenly, everything around me felt more vivid. The rain outside sounded like it was knocking on the window to come inside. I didn't even notice it was raining until now. I stared at Rose's face and could see every line on her forehead, every wrinkle on her cheek. I noticed my breathing slow. I don't even believe in this stuff, but I almost felt frozen in time as I absorbed everything Rose was telling me. Rose took a sip of a glass of water and didn't let the silence bother her. She continued.
And ever since then, they only got clearer and more precise. It eventually came to the point where she could tell us who was calling before we picked up the phone. It became normal to us, and we treated it like a game. This gift has really changed her. When we were walking through the park one evening, Michelle felt a heaviness on her chest that she couldn't shake. I was concerned she was having a heart attack because of how she was acting. She somehow knew this wasn't medical and said she was feeling a spirit connecting to her.
Rose closed her eyes and relived the moment.
Oh, Michelle had me so worried. I held on to her, and after a few minutes passed, she opened her eyes and began crying hysterically. She told me a little girl was buried there. She would not let it go, and we eventually called the police out. There was a nice officer working that evening who listened to every word Michelle told him and never rolled his eyes once. You know, I think he had something in his own life. That he was a believer long before we called him. He decided to get a shovel and start digging on his own before calling for backup. Given the circumstances, it took him about 15 minutes, but he eventually found a trash bag. He stopped digging and didn't even open the bag before calling for backup and started wrapping police tape around the park.
I felt like a child during this story time. I couldn't stop asking questions. So was there a body? What was in the bag? Rose let out a sigh.
Oh, yes. There was the body of a young girl. That's a sight I'll never forget. The police questioned Michelle, but it didn't take them long to rule her out as a suspect, and they slowly started using her for help with other cases.
I tried to draw all of these pieces of information together and figure out how it could possibly relate to Patch Lane. I asked, how did Michelle eventually end up living at Patch Lane?
Samuel and I didn't want Michelle to move out. We were concerned that her and the kids' safety, and we really loved them having them here. But Michelle felt it was important to be an independent mother for those children and started searching for a safe but affordable home. She looked mostly in this area so that we could help with watching the kids. One day she was at the corner store grabbing some milk and saw a paper taped to the bulletin board of a house for rent. It was surprisingly affordable and not far from our cabin, so she left the store and drove straight to the house on Patch Lane. She became immediately drawn to the house like a moth to a flame. As soon as she got home, she called the number on the paper and said she would take it. Imagine my surprise when I got home that evening and she told me she was moving into the old house on Patch Lane. Everybody around here knows the story of that old farm, but somehow these stories never got to Michelle.
What happened after she moved into Patch Lane?
Moving into that house was a blessing and a curse. She finally gained the independence that she so desperately sought, but it came at a price. The visions became overwhelming. She barely slept at night. The visions became so intense that the line between reality and visions was slowly fading. She always talked about hearing a spirit telling her she needed to check out the basement. She found that old door with the lock on it and even called Samuel over one day and asked him to help her remove the lock. Now, you know, we're old-fashioned here, and we don't go snooping into other people's business. Samuel told Michelle not to go snooping and told her to mind her own business. He refused to help her open that lock. She didn't know how to open it herself without cutting it with bolt cutters, which wasn't an option since she didn't want the landlord to find out. I remember that when I first approached Patch Lane, I still saw the rusty lock on the door. So there was no way she could have gotten into that basement room unless she found the underground tunnel. I asked, "So then, how did she eventually get into that room?" Oddly enough, she wasn't the one that found the root cellar passage. It was her kids. One day they were playing in the yard and started jumping on something. The loud clink of metal got Michelle's attention, and she ran over to find the root cellar door. She put the kids inside and went back to the root cellar. She opened the door, walked down the stairs, and through the tunnel. She came to a hatch, and she opened it. She found herself in that locked room in the basement. She called me immediately after she found that room. I remember it as clear as day. A single tear made its way down Rose's cheek, making a path straight over each wrinkle. Rose added, "As soon as Michelle got into that room, she had the worst vision yet. She saw her own death." The rain turned into a monsoon. I heard thunder rumble in the distance, followed by lightning less than 2 seconds apart. I was taking a sip of water and trying to imagine what it would be like to envision my own death. Before I could even ask any further questions, Rose continued. "That was really when things got bad. Michelle found things in that room she shouldn't have, and she wanted to go to the police. But for some reason, she said she didn't know if she could trust them. Instead, she went straight to the feds. Well, you know where it went from there." I had a thought rush into my head. "Rose, do you know who the father of Michelle's children is?" Rose nodded her head and said, "Yes, I do." "Who?" I asked. Rose took a deep breath. "He was a cook at the restaurant Michelle worked at. He would force himself on her, and she just didn't say no. That job was the only thing she had for quite some time, and she was worried if she said anything that she would end up being the one in trouble. In a town this small, there weren't many jobs for her to choose from." My heart ached for Michelle. I can't believe she had to go through that. Oh, Rose, I'm so sorry. That must have been so hard for her. All we could do was try and help her. She even started trusting men again and started dating someone right around the time she moved to Patch Lane. But she was very secretive about his identity. All she told us was he was a good man and would be a great father to her kids if things went in that direction. So, dispatch interrupted me. "Dispatch to all units. Dispatch to all units. Please respond to River Road for flash flooding. We just received 6 calls coming in that the river has risen past the roads and the barricades need to be put up." 10:45, show me en route. Of course, Tim is one of the first to respond. 10:45, show me en route. Of course, Tim was one of the first to respond. He's one of the most active officers we have. Shortly later, I heard the rest jump on the radio.
10:39, on my way. 10:52, en route. I joined. 10:34, you can show me leaving old schoolhouse and I'll be en route. I turned to Rose. Rose, I have so many more questions for you. Would you mind if I stop back over tomorrow night? Rose gently threw both hands in the air.
Oh, of course. You're welcome back here anytime, Sarah. I hope you don't think I'm just some crazy old lady.
I assured Rose that I believed everything she told me, and I would love to come by tomorrow night. She walked me to the door and handed me a hot mug of coffee.
You can bring the mug back tomorrow when you see me.
I thanked Rose and headed down to River Road to start damage control. It took me almost 15 minutes to get there because of how quickly the roads flooded. I arrived on scene and we were all able to barricade the flooded road to prevent any vehicles from falling victim to the rising waters. I was on scene of various flooding incidents until the end of my shift. I was beyond soaking wet, and the first thing I did when I got home was strip naked and take a hot shower. Haley's new thing was to sit on the toilet and watch me the entire time I shower. At first, I thought it was creepy, but then I started to think she was concerned I was drowning every time I showered because she just looked so concerned as she sat there. I got out of the shower and gave Haley one of her bad time treats. I lay in bed, scratching her until we both fell asleep. Ring, 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 ring. What the hell? My alarm wouldn't shut off. Then I realized it was my phone. I answered in a groggy voice. Hello? Hey, Sarah, it's Dad. I'm sorry, did I wake you? Yeah, but it's fine. Is everything all right? Oh, yeah, I'm fine, but the basement's flooded pretty bad. I was hoping you could stop by here for a few hours before you go back to work tonight and help me move all these boxes upstairs. I never say no to my dad. I'm a daddy's girl, and we've always had each other's back. Of course, Dad. I'll be right over. Do you want me to grab lunch for us? Pizza? You read my mind, sweetie. I pulled up to my dad's house and carried the pizza inside. He came upstairs and we each scarfed down a couple of slices before heading downstairs to tackle this disaster. He had already done a lot of the heavy lifting by himself, which, of course, I didn't like. Dad, you should have waited until I got here to do all this. Don't worry, I still saved a lot for you. Can you help me carry all of these cardboard boxes in this corner? Just set them all in the family room. I began carrying the boxes up one by one. I came across one box labeled Teresa and couldn't help myself but to open it. It was all old photographs and clothing of my mom's. My dad saw me going through the photographs and came over and took some from my hands. He sat down and quietly admitted, I miss her so damn much. Do you realize how much you look like her? Whenever someone tells me I look like my mother, it's the best compliment I could ever receive. I don't care about being called pretty or gorgeous, but when I'm told I look like her, I can't help but smile. I know, Dad. I miss her too. It's hard to believe it's been over 20 years. We talked about our memories and we agreed that we should probably go visit her grave later today to make sure the flooding didn't damage the cemetery or the flowers that we keep around her site. I gathered myself and started carrying more boxes back upstairs. By about my fourth trip up, one of the boxes was so saturated that the bottom broke and the items spilled all over the stairs. I started picking up old uniform shirts of my dad's and some sports memorabilia that he had tucked away. When I picked up one of the uniform shirts, a photograph fell out. I picked it up to see if it was another picture of my mother, and to my surprise, it wasn't. It was a photograph of me when I was about 5 years old or so, standing next to a woman I found very familiar at a carnival or fair. Within the 2 seconds my brain was processing who was in the photograph, my dad came over and snatched the photo from my hand. "What are you doing?" he yelled. This was not like my dad at all. I was so confused. "Dad, I looked again at the photograph he was holding in his hand. The wires in my brain finally connected. I knew who the woman in the picture with me was. It was Michelle Klein. The Officer, Sarah Barkley Chronicles, Part 8, by Barkles 52. Why was there a photograph of Michelle standing there with me? This made no sense. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I'm not sure if it was shock or utter confusion my dad saw in my eyes. But as soon as he locked eyes with mine, he knew I'd figured it out. "How about we go sit down upstairs and talk, Sarah?" I didn't want to sit down. I felt a whirlwind of different emotions rushing through my body, and I began to feel dizzy. I grabbed onto the old wooden stair railing and caught my balance. "What the hell is going on, Dad?" "Sarah, let's just sit down and talk." I did not want to go sit down, but my body gave me no choice. We went upstairs and I sat on the couch. My dad walked into the kitchen and I heard pop. He walked back out with a bottle of Merlot in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. He sat down and poured each of us a glass. "This was always your mom's favorite one," he said with a shaky tone. I looked up at him and saw he had a tear rolling down his cheek, past his mouth and dripped into his hand. I needed answers and I needed them now. I asked, "Dad, why do you have that photograph?" He took a long sip of his glass of wine and began his explanation. Oh, where do I even begin? I met Michelle many years ago, only a couple of months after your mom passed. I was on duty and got a call for service in the park. Michelle had, she found something there. I stopped to him. I spoke with Michelle's grandmother, Rose, and she told me about Michelle's gift. My dad's eyebrows raised and he nodded his head. "Ah, so you know." Well, Michelle sensed that there was a young girl buried in the park. Sure enough, there was. We were all so impressed with her gift, we began using her for help in our unsolved cases. Michelle and I got to spend a lot of time together working those cases, and we became very good friends. One thing led to another, and we became romantically involved. My dad glanced down and shook his head. I was so happy, and yet I was so guilty and ashamed for being happy so soon after your mother passed. We agreed it would be best not to tell anyone about us. Whenever we wanted some normalcy, we took you kids to the amusement park in the city, and we just told you we were friends. That's where the photograph was taken. Why didn't you tell me all of this when I started asking you about Patch Lane and about Michelle Klein? My tone grew louder as I began to become angry that my dad, my best friend, lied to me. I didn't lie, Sarah. I told you I'd been to Patch Lane for that ATF raid, which was true. I'd been there before I ever met Michelle. I just left out the fact that I'd been there additional times. He paused, then continued. And you never actually asked me about Michelle. You were here talking to Tim about her. When I heard you say her name, my heart stopped. I thought she'd died 20 years ago. And that's the God's honest truth. First your mom, then Michelle. I kind of gave up hope after I lost Michelle. Well, at least when I thought I had lost her. When you asked me about the tenants in that house, I just did my best to describe her, but like I said, she had a reputation around town. And she wasn't the kind of girl our family and friends would want me seeing. Of course, the reputation was entirely unfounded, and I just wished I could have helped her out of it. I could feel the anger stirring inside my gut. How the hell can you say that wasn't lying to me? You're right. By omitting the truth, I lied. I'm so sorry, sweetie. I didn't tell you when you were little because of how soon your mom had passed. You barely even understood what death was back then. And as time went on, there was no need to bring up the past. So then what did happen to Michelle, Dad? Moving into that house was a horrible mistake for her. That house was haunted by its past and its present. Her gift became more of a curse, and I always worried it would be her downfall. She knew she was destined to die in that house. Nobody should ever have to experience what she did. When she found all of the guns in that hidden tunnel, and in that room, she called me immediately. She wanted to report it to the police, but I remembered what happened last time that happened. There was a mole in the department, and they gave Joseph a heads up before the ATF raid, so he had time to get out of there. He eventually just found new hidden root cellars and tunnels and rooms to hide his stuff in all over that farmland. I gave her the phone number of a friend of mine in ATF, and I'm not sure what happened after that, but somehow she ended up in witness protection. And Tim? Did he know all of this and lie to me too? I was actually screaming by this point. What? Tim? Oh, God, no, he didn't know anything. He's a straight arrow, Sarah, you know that. He's there when you need him, follows the rules, and never sticks his nose where it shouldn't be. He still doesn't know any of this. I could feel the smoke pouring from my ears. I chugged the rest of my wine and stormed out the door. My dad began to call for me to wait, but I kept going. I felt so hurt, so betrayed that he lied to me after all of these years. I sped home and immediately opened a new bottle of Riesling. I opted for a white this time because it was in the mood for chugging, not sipping. I didn't know how to cope with this stress, but I knew how to drink. I quickly emailed Sergeant Oakley and told him I was going to use some unscheduled vacation time because of some personal family matters I had to deal with. Sergeant Oakley may be tough, but he's a firm believer that if you aren't 100% mentally at work, then you need to take a vacation day because you're only putting your life and coworkers' lives at risk by being there. I grabbed my glass of Riesling and went into the bathroom to draw a bath. I ran the water, added some bubbles, and tested the water with my right toe first. Perfect. I stripped down and slid into the tub, closing my eyes as I slid under the water. I could hear the rain outside my bedroom window, beating down rhythmically. It had been raining here for a few days now. And while I hated the flooding and the horror that comes with it, I loved the sound of rain. Shit, I just remembered that I promised Rose I'd go back and see her tonight. I leaned over the tub and texted Jim to swing by. I figured I could ask him to return her mug and let her know I'd be back in a few days. He said he would stop by after roll call. I hopped out of the tub, put on my favorite, comfiest sweatpants, and curled up on the couch with Haley. I began to feel like she was the only one I could truly trust and who hadn't betrayed me. I heard a knock at the door and jumped off my couch to let Tim in. I opened the door and was startled when it wasn't Tim standing there. There was a girl about my age standing in front of me. She had long blonde hair, and I must admit she was very pretty. She looked straight at me and said, "Sarah Barkley?" I was a bit on edge, so I hesitantly answered, yes? "Hi, I know you don't know me, but I'm Samantha. You were working on a case involving my mother, Michelle Klein. I scooped my jaw off the floor and said the first words I could get out. Oh, hi. Thankfully, Samantha didn't let my awkwardness interrupt her. She continued, I'm here because I think there's something you need to know. I finally could formulate a real sentence and offered her to come inside. She accepted, and I asked, well, what am I supposed to know? When the marshal spoke to my brother and I, they said the reason our mother came out from hiding was because she found out my brother had brain cancer and was dying. I responded, yes, that's true. They told me the same thing. Yeah, that's the problem. I was confused. My brother doesn't have brain cancer. He's perfectly fine. He never had cancer. He doesn't even take medication for anything. He's perfectly healthy. My mind began to race. Who said that he had cancer? Did Michelle tell the marshals, or did they tell her? Why? Who would lie about that? I verbalized some of my questions. Do you know who told her that he had brain cancer? Yes, well, kind of. The marshals told me that they were the ones who told her because they received notification. They said they constantly kept check on my brother and I to make sure we weren't in any danger. When I asked them for specifics, they said they would have to go back and check their client files and check who signed off on the supplemental report. When they went to check, though, it was gone. My gut tells me I can't trust the two marshals I spoke to. But now I don't know who falsely notified them my brother had cancer. I began to realize somebody intentionally lured Michelle out of hiding and knew that if Joseph Mueller saw her, he would kill her. Listen, Samantha, I absolutely want to look into this further, but I just used some vacation time and took off the next few days. I'm happy to help you next week, though. Samantha nodded her head in disappointment. I know. I'm sorry I even bothered you at home. I got your address from your chief. I was honestly pretty surprised he gave it out, but he said you wouldn't mind me stopping by. Goddamn Chief Fox. No surprise there. Samantha continued. I just wanted to offer my help, though. I appreciated the offer and asked, Thank you. How can I get a hold of you if I need you? Samantha gave me her phone number and her hotel address where she'd been staying in town. I reassured her, I'll look into this, I promise, and I will let you know what I find. I just remembered about Rose's cup that I still had. Oh, and I have your great-grandmother's coffee mug. Long story, but if you see her while you're in town, can you give this back to her? Samantha looked at me confused and asked, Which great-grandmother are you referring to? Rose, your mom's grandma. She used to live with when you were little? Samantha looked like she just saw a ghost and told me, Officer Barkley, Grandma Rose passed away a few years ago. I am going to need more than just one vacation day. I'll update all of you when I return to work. I was starting to question my own sanity. There was no way I was sitting in that cabin talking to a ghost. I even held the coffee mug in my hand to prove it. There was no polite way of asking the question I had pounding in my mind like a hammer on a nail. I decided to just ask Samantha, Well, are you sure your grandma's dead? I couldn't tell if Samantha was offended or just surprised by the question. She thought about it for a moment and said, Well, yeah, I think so. Why would my aunt lie to me about that? That was her mother. I asked for clarification. So this aunt of yours would be your mother's aunt too? So she's actually your great-aunt? Samantha nodded her head in agreement. Yes, I just never called her or thought of her as a great-aunt since she's pretty young because of how old my mom was when she had me. I pressed her for more details. Do you remember exactly what your aunt told you? Samantha's glance moved to the upper right of the room while she was deep in thought.
Her eyes came back down and met mine as she answered. Yeah, I remember when she got the phone call. She said it was the police department, and they'd notified her that Grandma Rose had passed. My aunt was so upset because she had asked for the body and what next steps she could take. They told her that because there was no family left in the area, it took a long time to contact the next of kin, at which point Grandma Rose had already been cremated. It broke my aunt's heart. It seemed like every time she tried to call the station or ask questions, they told her everything was gone and there was no need for her to come up for anything. I began to wonder if the mole had something to do with this. Oh, Samantha, I don't know what's going on here, but your Grandma Rose is very much still alive. Samantha began to tear up, and before she broke down, I stopped her and said, Here, let me write down the address for you, and you can go see for yourself. She will be so much happier that you bring this mug back than me. I wrote down the address and handed the mug to Samantha, and the puzzle pieces began coming together. What if the mole in the department is behind all this? Why? I thought about all of the phone complications Rose was having and blaming Samuel for them. Why didn't Rose try to call any of her family? Did she ever try? Did someone cross her phone wires so that any outgoing calls would be screened first? If this is the case, it had to be related to whoever has the ability to make all those 911 hang-ups and knows the phone system inside and out. I walked into my kitchen to grab another glass of wine and realized there's only one thing that could calm my mind more than wine: my Aunt Maggie. I decided to take a weekend getaway to Aunt Maggie's. She'd been there for me all my life, and if anyone could help me sort through all of this, it was her. I always feel better after speaking with her and spending time on her secluded farm. She just has a way of putting things into perspective between her classic farmhouse, vibrant garden, acres of nothing but fields. It's the perfect cocktail for relaxation. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number. The sweet voice I know so well answered the phone with an almost singing greeting. Hello? Hi, Aunt Maggie. Hi, honey, how are you? Can I come spend the weekend with you? I need a mini vacay right now. Sure, you know you're always welcome in my home. Thank you so much. Do you mind if I bring Haley with me? Haley? Who's Haley? Is this a new friend? No, it's my cat I recently adopted. Oh, I didn't know you got a cat. Your dad didn't mention your cat when we last spoke. I'm looking forward to meeting her. Drive safely and I'll see you soon. I grabbed some clean clothes from the closet and my toiletries from the bathroom. Packing took about 10 minutes. Then I collected Haley's food, bowls, bed, litter box, and supplies. It took me longer to pack her stuff than mine. Once I had everything ready, I loaded the bags into the car, grabbed Haley, put her in her new carrier, and headed for Aunt Maggie's. I immediately began to feel my stress level decline as I pulled out of my driveway. After a short drive, I arrived at Aunt Maggie's home. It was a beautiful, large 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch. She took great pride in her home and spent countless hours tending to the colorful gardens and flower beds that lined the front, walk, and driveway. An avid gardener and home cook, her vegetable beds were green and luscious. Clearly, all the recent rain had helped her crops. Since I arrived later in the day, I was surprised to see her sitting on the front porch, working a crossword puzzle and enjoying a cool glass of lemonade. I knew she was waiting for me to arrive, and that made me feel so loved. Once she saw me, she stood up, placed her crossword book in a basket beside the front door, and walked down the front steps to meet me. It was so nice to see her, and I knew Haley was ready to get out of her carrier. She had been meowing for the last 15 minutes of the ride. I guess she was afraid of the unknown.
I can certainly relate to that. Sarah, how was your trip? It was good. No traffic, which was nice. I think I made the drive just between storms, too. That's good. I was worried you'd have to take an alternate route with all of the storm damage in the area. Then I remembered just how bad the storm damage was in some of the areas. Aunt Maggie's place luckily seemed to have escaped the brunt of the storm. Did you have any storm damage? It looks like you got pretty lucky. Oh, I'm fine. There was a little water in the basement and garage, but nothing that I couldn't handle. It sounds like your new friend would like to get out of the car. So how about we take her inside and I'll make you dinner? I have stuffed chicken breasts in the oven and green beans on the stove. As I walked through the front door, I could smell the chicken, the freshly baked bread resting on the kitchen island, and the faint traces of homemade peach pie. Oh, how wonderful it was to be here. It reminded me of all the times I would stay with Aunt Maggie as a young child when my dad was working double shifts. Sometimes I really miss those days. Sarah, do you mind setting the table? I just need to pull the chicken out of the oven and rinse the green beans. Then everything should be ready to eat. Sure, I can handle that. Are the dishes still in the same cupboard? Yes, center section, lower shelf. The silverware is in the drawer beside the refrigerator. I immediately set the table and helped Aunt Maggie carry the heavy pots to the table. She really made a lot of food for just the two of us. But I guess after making such large meals for so many years, she couldn't break the habit. We sat and began to load our plates. Everything smelled delicious and tasted incredible. I didn't realize until the first bite how much I missed my aunt's cooking. Everything's wonderful. I forgot how amazing your stuffed chicken breasts taste. Oh, well, thank you, but I can't take all the credit. The butcher shop always gives me the best cuts of meat and breasts. That makes the biggest difference when you're cooking. We enjoyed dinner, and I ate so much food I could hardly move. I helped Aunt Maggie clear the table and load the dishwasher and put away the leftovers. Then we retired to the front porch to enjoy a glass of Riesling and the cool evening air. So, how's work? Are you busy? Oh, you have no idea. Between all the storm damage calls and the murder case I caught last week, things have been crazy. I'll be very happy once things return to normal and it finally stops raining. Oh, are you on that Patch Lane murder case I saw on the news? I'm glad you caught the guy. That jerk was no good from the word go. I guess his luck finally ran out. Since Aunt Maggie had grown up and lived in the area years ago, I thought maybe she might be able to share some details about the Patch Lane farm. Did you know Joseph Mueller? Yes, I did. Well, sort of. I never met him, but he used to call the insurance company where I worked all the time to report property damages on the farm. We handled and processed the insurance claim for his farm insurance provider, since they didn't have a local office in the area. They found it was more feasible to sub out all the claim work. He always seemed to have a problem with his property, especially after a storm or renovation project. One time he called and reported that someone had dug up one of his fields and he lost a $10,000 crop of corn. We didn't handle crop damage claims, but he wouldn't stop calling. He claimed that his property damaged as well, so the firm sent a field technician to investigate. Turns out he had dug up the field himself and had accidentally hit an unmarked utility line that sparked and partially burned the field. He was extremely lucky that the utility company didn't press charges or sue him for the repairing costs. We had a tough supervisor at the time, and he finally intervened and convinced the insurance company to terminate his coverage based on the fraudulent claim. My aunt went on to tell me that Joseph had a girlfriend working at the insurance firm, and that she'd tried to reinstate his coverage without a supervisor's authorization, but was fired when they discovered the policy change. Aunt Maggie had piqued my interest. It was amazing to me that she knew of all of this. Do you remember her name?
Yes, I do. Her name was Betty Ann, but everyone called her Beat. I think her married name was Smith or Smooth or something like that. I'm not sure if she changed it after the divorce. I lost track of her after she left the company.
How ironic. Chief's Fox secretary was named Betty Ann, and he called her Beatbox. I couldn't help but laugh.
What's so funny? Aunt Maggie asked.
Well, Chief Fox secretary is named Betty Ann, and sometimes he will call her Beatbox. We always laugh about it since we didn't think that Chief Fox knew what a beatbox was.
Oh, wait a minute. I bet your beatbox is the same one I worked with all those years ago. There can't be too many women in town called Beat. If it's the same person, she'd be close to my age or maybe a few years older than I am. I haven't seen her in years, but she used to have the prettiest chestnut brown hair. She always wore it in an old updo style with a black ribbon tied around it. She always thought she looked like a movie starlet, but if you ask me, she looked more like a cartoon character.
I couldn't believe it. The chief's secretary had the same hairstyle. It had to be the same person. I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through my photos from our last department holiday. I knew I had a photo of her, and I wanted to see if Aunt Maggie recognized her. I found one and enlarged the portion with Beatbox. Does this look like her? Aunt Maggie studied the photo and said,
Yes, that's her. She's gained a lot of weight, and you can tell she colors her hair, but that looks like her.
I began to wonder and talk to myself out loud. How could Chief Fox not have known this? Why would he hire her then? To my surprise, Aunt Maggie actually responded to my rhetorical question. Well, I can't say for certain, but I wouldn't be surprised if Beat was made to sign a confidentiality agreement not to disclose her termination. Plus, it was much easier back then to simply leave things off your resume. Now you can't get away with that because of all the technology and ways to check. My mind began to race. Could Beatbox be the mole in the department? Was Chief aware of it, or, heaven forbid, could he be part of the leak? Chief was a straight shooter. Granted, a sexist straight shooter, but nonetheless, he was a fervent supporter of the justice system. So I really didn't think he could be involved, but I had to be sure. People's lives were at stake. We stayed outside just long enough to capture the sunset. Aunt Maggie and I then moved inside and reclined on the sofa. She always watched the nightly news at 10 p.m., so I knew she wouldn't want to miss it. I didn't want to worry her about Beatbox, so I changed the conversation to a lighter topic. Haley. That wonderful little purr monster had won my aunt's heart and seemed totally at home nestled on my aunt's wingback chair. Oh, your little friend is an angel. I'm so glad you have her to keep you company. She is. I never knew I could love her as much as I do. I wasn't looking for a cat, but now I can't imagine life without her. I glanced at the mantel clock, and it was almost time for the nightly news. I decided to refill our wine glasses and grab some popcorn from the kitchen. Aunt Maggie loved popcorn, so I knew she would enjoy sharing a bowl with me. I settled on the couch and covered my legs with the throw. I didn't have to call Haley. She leaped from the back of the chair and landed squarely on my lap. I swear this cat has blanket radar. Aunt Maggie laughed and commented on Haley's agility. Clearly her paw felt much better and was healing. The news began promptly at 10, and the lead-off story was no shocker. More rain in the forecast. Aunt Maggie was the first to comment. I swear if it rains much more, I'll have to build an ark. I agreed and realized that I was probably in for a rough return to work. We would probably be inundated with calls for flooded basements, trapped elderlies, and stupid motorist calls for individuals who believed their vehicles could double as boats when the water rose too high for driving. Seriously, the amount of money the department spends rescuing these people could be better used for new gear and additional officers. The next story talked about the weather disruption of the local baseball league game schedule and landslides in the local community. Apparently, the league supervisors were discussing a shortened season and wanted public feedback at the next meeting. The heavy rains had caused local hillsides to collapse and created lengthy traffic detours along busy highways. After a short commercial break, the news anchor continued with the top stories. To my surprise, it was an update to the Patch Lane murder case. Earlier today, accused murderer Joseph Mueller posted bail of $1 million and walked out of the local county jail. His trial is set to begin sometime in early 2019. What the hell? That bastard was supposed to be remanded until trial based on flight risk. Who posted the bail, and what was the judge thinking? I immediately texted Tim. Did you see that Mueller posted bail? Instead of texting, Tim was calling me. Listen, I know you're on vacation, but we have a huge problem. Mueller flew the coop, and the marshals are worried he's after you. They're looking for him now, but there's no telling where he's gone. They want your location so they can send backup. This guy has a score to settle with you. Tim, why did the judge give him bail? This is a capital murder case. Apparently, his lawyer argued that he had advanced prostate cancer and required pain management and chemotherapy that cannot be provided in prison. The judge bought the argument and set bail at $1 million. No one thought he'd be able to post it, but within 30 minutes he was walking out the door. Who posted the bail? Well, that's another problem. The paperwork is missing and the camera above the bail office was not functioning. We have no visual of who posted that bail. If you're asking me, it looks like Mr. Mueller had some help. The marshals were at the station all day following up on cases, and it seems that log records are not correct and key pieces of evidence are missing from the lockup. Needless to say, it was a real shitstorm, and Chief is not happy. The suits were all over his ass. They're threatening to pull rank and ask the state attorney general to intervene. Barkley, I think we have a mole in the department, and I'm worried about you. Tim, I have to go. It looks like the marshals are calling me. Barkley, be careful. Watch your back. He didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. I answered the incoming call, and it was one of the marshals I'd met during the investigation. Barkley, we need to meet. Now. What is your location? Mueller's in the wind, and we have no solid leads to his whereabouts. I'm visiting family 1 county over. Can I meet you? No, we will come to you. Stay at your location. We will be there in 20 minutes. True to his word, Marshal Compton and a few of his cavalry arrived within 20 minutes, and it had begun to rain. He rushed to the front door, and Aunt Maggie left him inside. Clearly, she was worried about me. Hi, I'm Maggie, Sarah's aunt. Hello, ma'am. I'm Marshal Compton at the U.S. Marshals. I'm here to talk with Officer Barkley. As I walked around the corner, Marshal Compton redirected his conversation to me. Is there somewhere we can speak privately? We can talk here in the living room. My aunt can stay, as I believe you'll be interested in some information she shared with me. Protocol dictates that we talk privately, but if you feel her information has a direct bearing on the investigation, we will allow her to stay. Yes, you will want to hear what she has to say. Aunt Maggie offered the marshals a glass of lemonade, and we walked to the living room. We sat down, and the marshals began to talk. We were recently alerted to inconsistencies with the Patch Lane paperwork by the district attorney's office, and began to fear there may be a saboteur in the department. We began to identify individuals with access to evidence and who would be able to alter documentation. Since your department is small, we had a handful of suspects, and we began to evaluate each one. Some of those individuals were quickly ruled out. Others remained under investigation until we could clear them. When we were at the station last week, I noticed Chief Secretary, Ms. Rhodes, pull out of the station parking lot in a newer Audi R8. I'm not on the best with cars, but I did remember a lot of the guys drooling over her new car when she got it a year ago. Oh yeah, that car. That's made for someone like 40 years younger than her. I know what you're talking about. What's the significance? The marshal continued. It sparked my curiosity, so I began to suspect there was more to Miss Rhodes. I began to investigate her financials because there is absolutely no way she could afford that car on a police salary. Hell, I can't even afford that car, and my wife's a lawyer. Clearly, she had other income that she's not reporting on her annual tax return. We also took a look at her credit report. The woman has a serious shopping issue. Marshal Compton paused for a moment and then resumed. We have reason to believe that she is somehow involved with the Michelle Klein murder, but we are uncertain as to the extent of her involvement. We are awaiting a court order to dig deeper on the financials. Aunt Maggie then repeated her story of Beat's prior work experience and subsequent dismissal to the marshals. They asked questions, some that Aunt Maggie could answer, others she couldn't. One lingering question that no one could answer was why Beat would lure Michelle out of witness protection now. It made no sense. As quick as I could finish my thought, I heard a gunshot out the window. The Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicles, Part 9. I grabbed Haley, handed her to my Aunt Maggie, and directed her, Aunt Maggie, take Haley and hide in the closet. I immediately pulled my Glock 43 from my concealed holster and ran outside with the marshals towards the sound of the gunfire. Marshal Compton slammed the front door open with his polished shoe, and we ran outside. It was pouring down rain again, to find the other marshals on top of a woman restraining her over near the tree line. You bastards! She needs to die too! The woman screamed in a shrill cry. Once the handcuffs were on her, I placed my Glock back into my waistband holder. It was Beat. Thank God she missed the window and fired into the side of the house. She must have followed the marshals here and approached through the woods, and then made an attempt at my life. As the marshals got her to her feet, she saw me standing there. She took one look at me, and I felt coldness. She said in a much slower, lower voice than her previous cry, Don't you think this over, Officer Barkley? The marshals loaded her into their unmarked Ford Explorer and began driving her back to the station. Marshal Compton offered to give me a ride back to the station to listen in on the questioning. I figured my little vacay was dead and gone at this point, so I took him up on the offer and got in his car. On the way back to the station, I told him everything that Rose and Samantha had told me. I told him about the visions Michelle had, and I told him about how someone lied about Rose's death. I was interrupted by Marshal Compton's radio when someone announced they found Joseph Mueller and had him in custody. I sunk deeper into the car seat, relieved to hear that news. We arrived at the station and I headed towards our video surveillance room, while Marshal Compton made it right down the hall towards the interrogation room. Since we're just a small-town department, we can't afford a fancy one-way mirrors and several interrogation rooms. We only have one room, and we have a video camera set up in the corner. If anyone wants to listen to the interrogation, they have to do it from the video surveillance room, which is really more like a closet. I saw Marshal Compton sit down. All right, Betty Ann, you know why we're here. Why did you try to shoot Officer Barkley? Beat just sat there,
staring at the corner of her shoe with a frown on her face. No response. Marshal Compton continued. Okay, let's talk about something else. We know you're involved with Joseph, but why the hell would you care about killing Michelle? That's his problem. She wasn't your problem. She knew nothing about your existence. It had nothing to do with you. He got Beat's attention now. What do you mean it had nothing to do with me? Joseph is my other half. Because of that bitch, he had to move into seclusion and hide all these years. The only reason he didn't leave the area is because of me. He loves me. So why now? Why did you lure her out of hiding? We know it was you that sent the memo to the marshals telling them her son had cancer. He was bluffing, but it worked. Yeah, I did it now because I didn't have much time left. Joseph has stage 4 cancer. She paused to wipe her nose and hold back her tears. And his dying wish is to see Michelle dead. She ruined his life, and she is the reason we couldn't truly be together. Marshal Compton pressed her further. So why do you have to lie about Michelle's grandmother's death? And how the hell did you pull that one off? I tried a while ago to lure Michelle out of hiding. I thought her grandmother's death would have brought her back. But I was wrong. Once it was done, though, I had to stick to the story. Beat smirked at the thought of how impressed she was with herself. Joseph and I have connections, and we were able to make Rose's phones only make outgoing calls to this area code. All of her family lived far away, so it was pretty easy to do. She would just get error messages on her phone if she tried. It was all making sense. This could explain the phone complications Rose was having. Marshal Compton began to think aloud. So then, that's why you faked Michelle's son's brain tumor, to lure her out of hiding? Beat had a full-blown grin at this point. Yes, I did, and it worked damn well. Marshal Compton jotted down notes on his notepad and flipped back and forth between pages, making sure he covered as much as possible. He asked, so why would you make those 911 hang-ups from Patch Lane? How did they benefit if Officer Barkley found the body? Beat's grin washed away and anger took over. I never made 911 calls. Do you think I'm an idiot? Nobody was supposed to find that body. Officer Barkley ruined this. That bitch doesn't know when to stop. Why are you so angry at Officer Barkley for responding there? She's the reason I'm here, isn't she? I was going to let Michelle rot away in that locked room in the basement after Joseph got his final wish and killed her. But Officer Barkley is the one who somehow still found that body. Then she went snooping over at Rose's. Can't she just keep her damn nose out of my business? Marshal Compton fed off her response. And what business is that? Beat slowly inhaled and released with a sigh. You know that. The ATF knows that. Nothing that it matters much now. Joseph ran guns for very important people. He made good money doing it and spoiled me with the cash. We took care of each other. What kind of important people? Beat's eyebrows raised, and her expression became serious. You'd have to kill me yourself before I ever gave you the names of those people. Anything you do to me, they would be worse. Marshal Compton finished his questioning, and they made arrangements to transfer Beat to the local jail. I couldn't stop wondering who had made those 911 hang-ups that led me to Patch Lane. Hell, who made the call that led me to Rose? Marshal Compton made his way back to me and reached out his hand. Officer Barkley, on behalf of the U.S. Marshals, I would like to thank you for a job well done. If you ever think about going federal, you should call me. Or if you ever think about maybe a cup of coffee, you can call me for that too. He handed me his business card with a personal cell number on the back. As hard as I tried, I couldn't stop myself from blushing. Thank you, Marshall. I'll keep that in mind. As flattered as I was, my mind switched gears completely and thought of Aunt Maggie and Haley. I swung by my house and showered, changed, and threw a couple of my favorite white wines into a bag. After everything I'd just been through, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I drove back to Aunt Maggie's and walked into her house. Despite the fact it was almost sunset, she was still awake in front of the television, with Haley on her lap. I poured us each a glass of wine, sat back, and let Haley crawl into my lap. In case you don't know, I'm a rookie cop in a small rural Pennsylvania town, currently stuck working the night shift. I work your normal patrol shift, driving around pulling traffic, responding to your usual domestic disputes, and whatever other wonderful calls dispatch sends my way. I responded to some bizarre calls the other week, and right as I thought life was returning to normal, I now find myself in the eye of yet another unsettling investigation. Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead. We just got a call from a woman who said she came home from work and can't find her daughter anywhere. She was very distraught, and the caller was not able to obtain much additional information. Can you please respond to this address for a potential missing child report? Dispatch provided me the address, and I started towards the house. I didn't activate my lights and sirens because 9 times out of 10, this missing child thing ends up being rebellious teens who don't feel like coming straight home after school. I approached the old farmhouse and noticed the beautiful flowers planted out front. It reminded me of my Aunt Maggie's house. I exited my cruiser, and before I even approached the front porch, a woman came running outside. Officer, please help. We can't find our daughter. Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God. My husband was supposed to be watching her today since he was off from work, and when I got home, she wasn't here. Her words poured out of her mouth faster than they could pour out into my ears. Ma'am, I understand you're very upset, but I need you to slow down so I can listen to everything you are saying. I'm Officer Barkley, but please feel free to call me Sarah. As I held up my hands to motion for her to slow down, a man walked out of the house. Officer, I'm David Fritz, the father. David reached his hand towards me. He was visibly shaking, but spoke much more clearly than his wife. He added, My wife here is Catherine. Our daughter is missing. I was with her all day today, and I must have fallen asleep on the couch. How stupid of me. David's glance dropped to the ground, and he shook his head. I don't know how I fell asleep, but whenever Catherine came home, it woke me up and we couldn't find Emma anywhere. David walked 3 steps to his left and put his arm around his wife to console her. I reached into my vest pocket and got out my notepad. Okay, I'm going to help you find your daughter. I just need to ask you a few standard questions before I can go out looking for her, though, all right? David shook his head in agreement. I asked, How old is Emma? 6. What does she look like? She has long brown hair, green eyes, and she's wearing yellow overalls today because we were outside planting. I wrote down everything he was saying. I asked, When exactly was the last time you saw her and where? Let's see, I know I had turned on the evening news, and she sat on the couch with me. That was at 5. Does Emma have any illnesses that would have cause for concern, including mental? This time Catherine spoke. No, she's a perfect little child. There's nothing wrong with her. And she wouldn't just go wandering off by herself. She's smart for her age. In the academy, we're taught one of the first steps in handling a missing child case is to check the entire house first. Very often, small children like to hide in the house as a game. I have several additional questions for you both, but would you mind if I first took a look around your house? David and Catherine led me into their home, and I worked my way from the top to the bottom. I started with the attic. Nothing. I checked every single bedroom and took my time in Emma's room to look for any clues as to where she may have gone. I naturally sensed that she left on her own accord because this is such a small town. We don't deal with kidnappings, aside from custody battles, that is. I finished my thorough search of the home with absolutely no luck. I went back outside and asked David and Catherine additional questions, since it appears this is becoming a real missing child case. Do you have a photograph of your daughter? Catherine began running into the house. Yes, I'll be right back. After approximately 30 seconds, Catherine came back outside with a photograph of Emma. It was a newspaper clipping of her. I was expecting a normal photograph, but I asked, "Oh, I see she was in the newspaper. What for?" As a cop, I'm naturally curious. "Oh, this paper is from a few months ago. You said your name was Sarah, right?" Catherine didn't get to finish explaining why Emma was in the newspaper before a switch turned on in her head, and she was redirected. "Yes, ma'am." "Sarah, do you have any children?" "No, ma'am." "All right, then. I won't expect you to understand what we're going through, but I need to get every single officer out there looking for our baby." I understood Catherine's concern, so I radioed to dispatch the description of Emma and a summary of what happened. I had every officer circulate the area to look for her, and I requested that Sergeant Oakley arrive to our scene. Sergeant Oakley arrived and took me off to the side. "All right, Barkley, you seem to have the most information right now. I'm going to finish up the paperwork here and the questioning. I need you to go start canvassing the area and talk to any nearby neighbors in case they saw this little girl in the past few hours." I got in my cruiser and started back towards the road. I saw a house not too far up on the right, so I started in that direction. I pulled up to a red brick home and knocked on the door. An older woman opened the door. "Hello, officer. What seems to be the problem? I hear a lot of commotion outside." The woman peeked around the side of me, looking towards all of the police cruisers up the road. "There's a little girl who went missing. Emma Fitz?" The woman slightly turned her head to the side and appeared a little confused. After about 3 seconds, she said, "Well, yes. Does this mean you found her?" Now I was confused. "No, ma'am. I'm here because we're still looking for her. Have you seen her?" "No, officer. May I ask why you begun to look for Emma again? Nearly 10 years after she went missing?"
The Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicles, Part 10. Is this woman crazy? Or what if she's right and David and Catherine Fitz were having a psychotic breakdown? I'd certainly seen people have mental breakdowns and relive their past, but I have never seen two people at exactly the same time have the same mental breakdown. Something doesn't add up. I remembered that I still had the photograph Catherine gave me in my pocket. I reached into my pocket and took out the photograph. "Ma'am, is this a photograph of Emma Fitz that you said went missing 10 years ago?" The woman grabbed her reading glasses off of her head and set them on her nose. She reached over and slowly took the newspaper clipping out of my hand. After studying the photograph for nearly 10 seconds, she responded, "No, this isn't the girl. I remember because Emma had blonde curly hair like Shirley Temple. Every time I saw her, I'd call her Shirley, and she would get so mad and yell at me, saying, 'My name isn't Shirley, it's Emma.'" The woman quietly laughed as she relived the memory. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't even get your name." "Oh, I'm sorry, officer. Yes, I'm Judith." I was still deciding whether or not I believed everything that Judith was telling me, but I had to investigate her knowledge further. What happened to Emma Fitz's parents after she went missing? Are they the same people who currently live there? Judith shook her head and her expression grew serious again. "No, they moved out about a year after Emma went missing. They were so depressed they just grew apart. They blamed each other for Emma's disappearance. Such a shame. Even after they moved, though, the house sat there for nearly 3 years. Everyone around here knew what happened and didn't want to move into that house because there were rumors about Emma's disappearance somehow being related to that house." Judith threw her hands in the air. "Oh, but you know how weird these small-town people can get. They think everything is haunted around here." "What do you know about the new people that moved into the house? Was their last name also Fitz?" "It's been over 6 years since that couple moved in here, and I never got to meet them. Right after they moved in, I tried to take brownies over to them, but they weren't home, so I left the brownies on their front porch with the note. They never said thank you or stopped by, so I didn't bother going out of my way to speak to them. The most I see them is when they drive by my house and turn down their lane. I did find it odd that they never took the Fitz name off the mailbox, but whatever." I thanked Judith for her time and let her know that I would possibly be stopping back tomorrow. "So is just sheer coincidence that David and Catherine have the same last name as the previous owners and have a daughter with the same name as their daughter? That's not possible. There's no way that's just a coincidence. There's something else going on here, and I'm determined to get to the bottom of it." I eventually headed back to the station for an impromptu shift meeting. I was one of the first to arrive back at the station and saw my good friend Tim there. Tim came up to me and asked, "Some weird shit, right?" I hadn't told anyone the information I got from Judith yet. I wasn't sure exactly what Tim was referring to, so I asked, "What exactly do you mean?" Tim looked surprised. "Come on, kid. You lived here back then. Even if you weren't a cop, I'm sure you remember hearing about how Emma Fitz went missing from that house like 10 years ago." "No, I honestly don't remember that, but you know how my dad always tried to keep me sheltered from what was going on in this town, because he didn't want me worried about what he did at work every day. So I'm confused, Tim. If that girl went missing 10 years ago, then what the hell happened today? Who are David and Catherine?" Before Tim could answer me, Sergeant Oakley walked in, along with the last 2 officers we were waiting on. Sergeant Oakley announced, "All right, everyone. I called this shift meeting to talk about what's going on with this Emma Fitz case. There's going to be a lot of media on this one, and there's a lot of weird confusion that's with this case. For those of you who weren't around 10 years ago," Sergeant Oakley paused and looked right at me. It's always nice to be reminded I'm the rookie in the room.
Sergeant Oakley continued. There was a little girl named Emma Fitz who went missing from that same house. We never could find her. Then today we found out another girl named Emma Fitz went missing from that same house. I know how fucked up this sounds, which is why we're here, so that I can explain to everyone the conversation I had with Mr. David and Mrs. Catherine Fitz. They aren't from this area, so when they moved here 6 years ago for David's job, they were tight on money and couldn't afford much for a house. But since Catherine was pregnant at the time, they needed a home that could comfortably accommodate their new baby. They found that house for almost half of what the market value was. As they soon found out, the reason that the house was so damn cheap was because of one huge contingency that the sellers required for the buyers to do. They required whoever bought their home to change their last name to Fitz. They wanted all official documents, white pages, everything relating to that address to have the name Fitz on it, in case their daughter Emma ever tried to find her way home. David and Catherine thought it over, but ultimately they decided to take the offer and change their last name. The previous owners left their new addresses and phone numbers for David and Catherine, and David told me that they still regularly get phone calls from them to make sure no one has moved into the house. Everyone around Amber Forest has their opinions on that house, but since they weren't from the area, they didn't view the house negatively just because a girl was kidnapped from it. And I can't blame them. I think it's stupid how paranoid people get about some of the house's histories around here. But I digress. Sergeant Oakley took a big sip of his hot coffee. I asked, so why the hell'd they name their daughter Emma? That's just creepy. Sergeant Oakley responded, Yeah, I agree, Barkley. I asked the same damn thing. They said they had no idea the prior tenant's daughter was named Emma. They just knew there was a little girl that went missing. Catherine was very upset when I told her that the little girl's name was also Emma Fitz. She started shaking and said she didn't know what made her choose that name. Her husband chimed in and told me he remembered exactly how Catherine chose the name Emma. One night, while Catherine was pregnant, she dreamed about walking down the hallway to their nursery. She saw the name Emma written on the wall. I guess she's in that mumbo-jumbo on signs or whatever, so she decided the dream was a sign to name their daughter Emma. My next question was one that everyone in the room was thinking. What the hell do we do from here? We're going to need to talk to the original Fitzes and reopen the original missing Emma Fitz case. Hello, I'm Officer Barkley. Thank you much for taking the time to drive up here and talk with us. The male reached out his hand. I'm Roger Fitz. This is my wife, former wife, Lisa. You mentioned on the phone that you needed to speak with us about our daughter's disappearance. Have you found... Roger could barely finish his sentence without choking on his own words. Have you found a body? No, I'm sorry to say that we don't have any developments relating to your daughter's disappearance. We actually have another disappearance of a young girl, 6 years old, and we think the two cases could potentially be related. Lisa looked confused. Well, what makes you think they're related? I'm sure there's been other children that have gone missing over the years as well. I took a deep exhale as I prepared to explain the eerie similarities to the Fitzes. Roger and Lisa were genuinely shocked, not only to hear about the latest disappearance, but also to find out she was named Emma. I continued, so, given these similarities, that's why we asked both of you to come speak with us. Do you have any ideas or inclinations as what could happen to both your daughter and the other Emma Fitz? Lisa repeatedly shook her head.
She slowly muttered, "That goddamn house. I told you it's that goddamn house." Roger consoled Lisa. Roger saw that I was intrigued by Lisa's comment and added, "Lisa's not fond of that house. She always thought that house had to do with Emma's disappearance." I wasn't exactly sure where he was going with this, so I asked, "What do you mean when you say the house had something to do with the disappearance?" "Oh, I'm not saying I believe it, but Lisa here has always been adamant that the house was, haunted, I guess. She had dreams about Emma disappearing several nights prior to her disappearance." I stopped taking notes and focused on actively listening. "How do you think the house contributed to her disappearance?" I asked Roger my question, although it was really directed at Lisa. To my surprise, Lisa answered, "That house is pure evil." Lisa intently stared at me as she responded. I left the interview room and went back out into the break room to find Sergeant Oakley gulping down a cup of coffee. "Hey, Sarge, you're not going to believe the original Fitz's theory on what happened to their daughter. They think the house was haunted." "Jeez, not another crazy couple. This town is filled with crazies who'd believe in that junk. Maybe I'm the crazy one for thinking they'd be more helpful with this search. I know you searched the house earlier, but I want you to go back over there with more men and do an intense search." It was not hard to take Sergeant Oakley's request as an insult to my ability to search a house. But, given the intensity of this case, I understood his decision. I offered to be one of the officers who went back to the house, and Oakley was happy to hear my willingness. Tim, Peterson, and I all went back to the house. We started in the attic, which was practically empty. We then worked our way down to the second floor and made our way through each room. We checked closets, dressers, under beds, absolutely everywhere. We had no luck finding Emma. We continued onto the main floor and checked all of the kitchen pantry cupboards, closets, even the basket of blankets next to the couch. Lastly, we worked our way into the basement. It was a small basement that consisted of one main, unfinished room with a toilet in the corner. It was common to have toilets in these old houses because, back when this was a coal mining town, the men would enter the house through the basement and use the toilet and shower before heading upstairs to the main house. I heard Tim quietly mumble, "What the hell?" Then he followed up with a louder, "Guys, come check this out." Peterson and I headed over to where Tim was standing, just under the stairwell. Tim was shining his flashlight against a small cubbyhole. The door did not have a handle on it, only had a plain silver faceplate with no keyhole and no mechanism on it. I leaned in close to look at the crack between the cubby door and the frame and saw there was a deadbolt securing the door shut. "What the hell is right?" I said. "This cubby can only be locked from the inside." Peterson ran out to his cruiser to grab the breaching kit that he was assigned. The breaching kit included any and all tools we would need to open a door. He returned about 30 seconds later, and we shoved a crowbar-like tool into the cubbyhole. After Tim made a few attempts, he finally got the door open. We found a girl laying on the floor, holding on tightly to a stuffed bear. She wasn't responding when I asked her if she was all right. I crawled into the cubby space and dragged her out. She was wearing yellow overalls. I placed my pointer and middle finger on her neck and felt for a pulse. It was weak, but she had a pulse. I immediately called for medics and repeatedly attempted to get a response from her. She slowly opened her eyes, but was unable to speak. It had been nearly 24 hours since she went missing. Medics arrived on the scene and I rode in the ambulance with her to the hospital. Tim and Peterson remained on the scene to gather evidence and to determine if any foul play was involved. Sergeant Oakley met me at the hospital. Sergeant Oakley came up to me outside of Emma's room where she was being treated. He advised, "I spoke with the guys and it sounds like Emma locked herself in that cubby. There's no way anyone else could have locked her in there. And there was nothing inside of that cubby that appeared suspect. This was yet again the typical outcome of a child hiding in her own home, but for some reason she must not have been able to get the lock open again." I replied, "Wow, that must have been so terrifying for her. Are you sure the parents had nothing to do with it? Why didn't they hear her scream? Why did her mom hand me that newspaper photograph instead of a real one?" Sergeant Oakley shrugged his shoulders. "Those old houses are built pretty solid. Maybe they couldn't hear her scream from all the way upstairs, especially if they had an AC unit running or other appliances. I agree it was weird she chose to give you a newspaper clipping, but that isn't a crime. These young millennials nowadays don't even keep printed photographs around the house anymore. Sure, they can take pictures when they have babies and keep them in frames, but after that, all they do is post them to social media. Maybe that was the most recent photograph she had." While still suspicious, everything Sergeant Oakley theorized was plausible. I waited at the hospital until Emma's parents came to see her. They went running into her room and cried while grasping their daughter. I let them become reacquainted with their daughter before asking Emma any questions. I waited until her parents were there because it's not advised to question a minor without their parents present. I introduced myself. "Hi, Emma. I'm Sarah. I'm a police officer. Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions?" Emma smiled and said, "Sure." "You gave your parents quite the scare with hiding in that cubbyhole. Why did you go down there?" "I was playing hide and seek, but I couldn't get the door open after I closed it. Then I fell asleep." "And why did you go down into that cubbyhole?" "Emma wanted to go in there." Caitlin corrected Emma. "Emma, remember what we talked about before? Try not to refer to yourself as Emma. Just say I or me when you're talking about yourself, sweetie, okay?" Emma responded to her mom, "I know, Mom. I'm talking about the other little girl with the same name as me." I quietly made my exit and headed back to the station. I told Sergeant Oakley that he was right. Emma was just a kid who found a place to hide and accidentally got herself locked in the cubbyhole. And he could tell Roger and Lisa Fitz they are free to go home. The Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicles, Part 11, by Barkles 52. In case you don't know, I'm a rookie cop in a small, rural Pennsylvania town, currently stuck working the night shift. I work your normal patrol shift, drive around pulling traffic, responding to your usual domestic disputes, and whatever wonderful calls dispatch sends my way. There isn't much to do around here, so teenagers tend to get creative on how to spend their weekends. This town is filled with old farmhouses that are rumored to be haunted, so we tend to get a lot of calls for teens trespassing in abandoned houses. Every year around Halloween, these calls dramatically increase. I guess the local corn maze and pumpkin patch just aren't satisfying the need for a good scare to most of these kids. There's one place in particular that we have to keep a close eye on. Gittler's Farm has become somewhat of an urban legend in this town. I remember hearing stories in middle school about the farm, and by the time I reached high school, I used to overhear my classmates planning to go to Gittler's Farm in the middle of the night to see if the stories were true. The urban legend is that there were 8 children living on the Gittler's Farm back in the 1930s. The temperatures were much cooler back then, dropping into the lower 30s at night as early as October. The entire second floor of the home consisted of one room, which was where all of the Gittler children slept. Their body heat alone helped keep the temperatures high, but on nights it was far below freezing. Mr. Gittler would throw some wood into the fireplace to heat up the home. On one particularly cold October night, Mr. Gittler lit a fire before his family went to sleep. Nobody knows how or why, but the entire house caught on fire. Mr. Gittler woke up to the sound of his screaming children. He woke his wife up, and they couldn't escape through their bedroom door. The fire trapped them inside. They were able to get out through a window and tried everything they could to get to their children, but it was too late. They lost all 8 children in the fire. Over the years, Mrs. Gittler was so stricken with grief, she eventually took her own life by hanging herself by a belt in their closet. Mr. Gittler continued to live alone and eventually died at the young age of 45 of natural causes. Some people speculate he died of a broken heart nearly 10 years after his wife's death, but the official story says he died of a heart attack. The original Gittler farm is nothing more than a burnt foundation in the middle of an overgrown field. The land has been bought and sold by many different farmers over the years to use for livestock. Story goes, if you drive to where the original farmhouse once stood and light a fire, then the ghost of the children will rush to put out the fire. As I'm sure you can imagine, this has become a big problem with teenagers testing the old urban legend. The other night, I was working and got the first call of the season.
Dispatch to 1034.
1034, go ahead.
Can you respond to the old Gittler farm for some teenagers trespassing? A neighbor just called and said she saw a car drive down the lane onto the farm.
10-4. I finished my late-night snack of some almonds and headed towards the old farm. I turned down the gravel lane and shined my spotlight in the direction of where the original farmhouse once stood. I wasn't surprised when I found a car sitting up ahead, idling. I pulled up behind the car and parked my cruiser. I walked up to the car and was surprised to see no one inside. Keys were left in the ignition, and the car was still running. I could smell smoke fill my nostrils, as if there was a fire directly behind me. I turned around and shined my flashlight in every direction. I couldn't see any fire, but the smell was nauseating. I covered my mouth and nose as I continued to search for those pesky teenagers. I made my way towards the woods, and the smell of smoke slowly dissipated the closer I got to the woods. I couldn't see anyone as I stood still and shined my light in every direction. I yelled, "Police! Is anyone here? You aren't in any trouble. I just need to ask you to leave." No response. I was thankful for the moonlight to help guide my search. I could hear the owls and crickets sound the deeper I wandered into the woods.
I still couldn't find anyone in sight, so I decided to turn around and head back to my cruiser. As I started my way back to my cruiser, that's when I heard it. I heard a shrill scream that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up and immediately started my adrenaline rush. I ran towards the sound of the scream. It sounded like it came from the direction of my cruiser. My gear on my duty belt jumped up and down as I ran. I finally made it back and looked into the parked car in front of my cruiser. I bent over and shined my flashlight inside. No one was in the car. I was still looking inside when I heard another shrill scream. This time it sounded like it was directly behind me, and I was overwhelmed with the smell of smoke again. I turned around and found two girls laying on the ground about 50 yards away. They were in the far left corner of the burnt foundation from the original Gittler farmhouse. I sprinted towards them and found one of the girls unconscious, while the other laid on the ground with her eyes wide open, staring at the sky. I got down on my knees and checked the vitals of the unconscious female. I felt no pulse. I checked the other female, who was staring at the sky, and I assured her help was on the way. I didn't know what drugs these girls took, but they needed help. I got on my radio. 1034 to dispatch. Dispatch, go ahead. I'm going to need an ambulance to my location for a possible overdose. I have one female who is conscious but unresponsive, and another female who has no pulse. Show me starting compressions. Dispatch to 1034, received. We show you starting compressions at 3:10 hours. I straddled the female and pressed down on her chest, as I was taught in my training. I could feel her cartilage snap from her ribs on my first compression. It was a feeling I will never forget. I continued compressions for approximately 3 minutes, by which time my arms felt as though they were going to fall out of their sockets. The ambulance arrived on scene and loaded up both females. I went to work the next night and found out that despite my efforts, the one girl didn't make it. I fucking tried so hard. An autopsy report was conducted and found that her lungs were filled with smoke, and not a single drug was in her system. I called the medical examiner's office and spoke to one of the investigators working the night shift. Hey, it's Officer Barkley. Can you explain to me what happened with the autopsy for the girl you got last night? Oh, yeah. Hey. I wasn't the one who handled it, but I read the report and talked to some people. That girl's lungs were so burnt and filled with smoke, it was as if you took her body right out of a fire. It didn't make any sense. There was no fire. When I first arrived on the scene, those two girls were nowhere in sight. Where were they? What the hell happened last night? In case you don't know, I'm a rookie cop working the night shift in a small rural town in Pennsylvania. With a little over 2 years on the job, I'm still considered a rookie, since most of the guys in my department have 10 to 15 years on. I keep getting dispatched to unexplained calls. I came across a guy last night that I honestly don't know if he has Alzheimer's or ghosts or something else. Last night I was really dragging my feet, getting ready for work. I just have been so exhausted lately that my eyelids felt like weights, and I felt absorbed in my couch. I laid down by Haley as she sat on my lap, purring in her sleep. I saw the clock turn to 2200, and I knew I had to start getting ready. I gently moved Haley, which she was not happy about. I decided to take a cold shower to help wake myself up. And as I went to turn on the shower, I stubbed my big toe against the bottom corner of my sink cabinet. I could feel the pain throb rhythmically as I bent down and grabbed my toe, as if holding it would help the pain. Shit, I broke the corner piece of wood off the cabinet. Poor Haley. She was frightened by my scream, and I heard her dart across the family room and into my bedroom to hide under my bed. When I was finally done showering, I walked through my family room towards my bedroom and smelled cat pee. I looked down and saw a wet spot in the middle of the room. Haley must have peed a little when she got frightened by my scream, poor girl. I cleaned up the mess and eventually finished getting ready. I arrived to roll call and found that Sergeant Oakley brought us all donuts. I don't care if it's a cliche. Who the hell doesn't love donuts? The sugar helped wake me up and I hit the road. I was maybe an hour or so into my shift when dispatch got in the radio. "Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead, I responded. "We got a call from a man who said someone broke into his house while he was out for a walk. He said nothing was stolen, but several items were moved." "Well, that's peculiar. 1034, you can show me en route." I headed to the location and approached a quaint little wooden home, tucked away in a deep pocket into the woods. I'm so used to seeing abandoned and run-down houses that I was actually surprised to see a home in such good condition. He had gorgeous trees surrounding his property that were colored red, orange, and yellow. He even had a cute little pumpkin sitting on his front porch. I approached the house and knocked on the door. "Officer Barkley with the police department." A few moments later, I was greeted by an older man, holding himself up with his cane. He had a slight hunch, but an adorable smile. Even through the wrinkles, I could see his dimples as he smiled. "Hello, officer. Thank you so much for coming. Here, please come in." I followed him to his family room, where he slowly lowered himself into a recliner that I could tell was his usual place. He had a cloth on the right arm of the chair, where I suspected he set his snacks as he ate. He also had a thick sheep's wool cushion on the seat. I took a seat on the couch. "I'm Officer Barkley, and who do I have the pleasure of sitting with?" I asked the older man. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Thomas Woolley." "It's nice to meet you, Thomas. Now tell me about what happened here earlier." I left my question open-ended to gather as much information as possible. "Well, I went out for my nightly walk and came home and someone was in my apartment. This has actually been going on for months. I tried to tell my kids, but they don't do anything about it and think I'm crazy or something. I finally had just had it and decided to call the police." "This has been happening for months. What's moved?" "Well, about 2 weeks ago I came home and the TV was on and the volume was blaring. I always turn off the TV before I leave. And even in unlikely case that I forgot to turn it off, I would have never had it that loud. It was piercing my eardrums." I took a few notes in my notebook. "Were any doors or windows unlocked? Any sign of entry?" Thomas began to look embarrassed. "No, nothing like that. My front door was locked when I returned home. Whoever is doing this must have a key." "Who all has a key to your home?" "Just my 2 kids, but I know it wasn't them. I called them both, and they live about an hour away." Thomas sounded very coherent, but because of his age and the fact things weren't lining up, I began to wonder if he suffered dementia or Alzheimer's. I asked, "Thomas, have you ever been diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's?" Thomas's smile faded away as he responded, "No, I'm perfectly clear up here." He tapped his head. "Okay, I didn't mean to insinuate anything. So tell me what else happened." "Let's see. Last week I came home and I found my wallet sitting out on the kitchen table. I could have sworn I took it with me. But even if I didn't have it with me, it would have been in my bedroom. It was left wide open, and the photograph of my granddaughter was laying on top when it's normally tucked inside the wallet. That same night, when I went to my bathroom, I found the medicine cabinet open with bandage tape in my sink." "Was there anything missing from your wallet or medicine cabinet?" "No. That's what makes this so frustrating. Who could be doing this, and better yet, why?" Thomas was becoming excited again with agitation. That is odd. Do you mind if I take a look at your medicine cabinet?" "Be my guest." I got up and found my way to his bathroom. I wanted to see what type of medication he was taking, or supposed to be taking. After a quick Google search of about 4 different medications, nothing would explain delusions. He was on medication for high blood pressure, high cholesterol, some supplements including aspirin. I made my way back to the couch and sat down with my notepad to continue. Before I could ask anything, Thomas added, "It got even weirder, though." "How so?" "I called my daughter that night to make sure she didn't stop by. As I expected, she said she'd never come to my house and thought I'd left my wallet out. When I asked her how she was doing, she told me her daughter, my granddaughter, had broken her arm at gymnastics. Such a strange coincidence that all that was moved was the photograph of her and bandages." "Yes, I suppose it is a small coincidence. What else was misplaced?" "Well then, about 2 or 3 days ago, I came home and my late wife's wedding ring was out of the jewelry box and on her nightstand. I went to put it away. My son called me and told me he was going to ask his girlfriend to marry him, and asked if he could use his mother's ring. I assumed he must have been here earlier and looked at it. I told him, of course, his mother would love that. Then when I asked him if he was here earlier, he sounded confused, and told me he hadn't been here in nearly a month." Okay, now I was starting to bite. That is a weird coincidence. Okay. So how about you tell me about what happened tonight then? Any more coincidences? "I haven't noticed any coincidence yet, but I called the police because now someone is damaging my stuff. The bottom of my sink cabinet is busted in the corner. The piece of wood was just sitting on the floor next to it. I would have known if I'd done that myself. Then there was a huge wet spot in the middle of my family room. Ugh. Then sitting on my wife's nightstand was an old poem she used to keep at her vanity on the mirror when she was sick." Holy shit. This sounded like my apartment right before I left. But still, these are just coincidences, right? Can I see the poem? "I thought you might ask that. Here." Thomas reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to me. The paper read, "My love, I will always be with you, my one and only. I will be a part of everything you do, and when I reach my second life, I'll be sure you know. You'll have a guardian angel, your wife. I got goosebumps down my arm. Wow. I didn't know what else to say. I never liked the poem. I don't know why she loved it, but she read it every day and told me it was for me to hold on to when she was gone. Thomas's eyes began to fill with tears that I could tell he was fighting to hold back. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. Should I tell him about my eerily similar day? What if I'm just as crazy and falling victim to pure coincidence from a man who has dementia? I decided I was going to finish asking my questions, but keep my concerns to myself. Thomas, did anything else happen today? One last thing. The funeral director's business card was on the floor next to my chair. I kept that card on my desk. What is this person trying to tell me? Do you think it's a threat? What do your kids think is going on? My son thinks I'm crazy. My daughter used to think I was crazy, but now she suspects my wife's ghost. Psst. Ghosts aren't real. Someone's breaking in. I was honestly surprised that Thomas didn't think it was his wife's ghost. Almost everyone else in this town was on the haunted bandwagon from what I've seen. Thomas, I think I have everything I need. There's no sign of forced entry, so I'm not going to be able to call out the state police crime scene investigator. Have you considered installing a security camera? I'm happy to stop back out tomorrow night if you'd like. Thomas let out a disappointed sigh. Yeah, maybe I'll try a camera. It's okay, I'll prepare myself for this scenario. I figured there wouldn't be much you could do. I'm really sorry, Thomas. I promise I'll stop by tomorrow night to check in on you. Thank you, ma'am, but it isn't really necessary. I left Thomas's and kept replaying his story from what happened earlier tonight. The broken cabinet, the wet carpet, the funeral director's card. I felt incredibly anxious and was on edge. I became paranoid that there was something more sinister going on, or possibly just a warning from a loved one. I couldn't shake it. I just couldn't get rid of the heart palpitations and sweaty palms. I turned my cruiser around. I didn't know what else I could possibly do, but I was going back to Thomas's. It felt like a magnetic pull. I arrived and knocked on the door. No one responded. I thought maybe he went to sleep, but his family room light was still on. I peeked through the window and saw Thomas laying face down on the floor. I grabbed my breaching kit from my cruiser and I ran towards the house. I got on my radio. 1034 to dispatch. I have an unresponsive male. Send me an ambulance to... Redacted. I rammed the door open and rushed in. He still had a pulse. I rolled him over and tried to wake him up by giving him a sternum rub. Groaned. He was not able to become responsive, but eventually the medics arrived on scene, and I followed them to the hospital. The nurse came over and touched the back of my hand. He was so lucky to have you there, officer. Only another 5 minutes and he wouldn't have made it. You saved this man's life tonight. He's going to pull through. I remembered the last line of the poem Thomas showed me. I'll make sure you know you'll have a guardian angel, your wife. The Officer Sarah Barkley Chronicles, Part 12. In case you don't know, I'm a rookie cop working the night shift in a small rural town in Pennsylvania. With a little over 2 years on the job,
I'm still considered a rookie, since most of the guys on my department have 10 to 15 years on the force. I keep getting dispatched to unexplained calls. Being a rural town, we have plenty of corn mazes, haunted houses, and hayrides this time of year. Since Halloween was last week, farmers have been spending their time clearing their cornfields. It's pretty common to find some interesting things during this process, such as Oakley sunglasses, jewelry, or hats. It's funny how terrified people get when they're chased by a chainsaw with no chain, and tend to lose articles all over the place. Farmers typically don't call the police when they find various items in their abandoned cornfields come November, but this year was different. I knew I was nearly done with my shift when I saw the sun began to rise. I grabbed my morning coffee to get me through the last hour of shift when dispatch got on the radio.
Dispatch to 1034.
1034, go ahead.
Can you respond to for a farmer who found something in his corn maze while he was out clearing his field?
1034, show me en route. I wondered why dispatch didn't tell me what the something was that the farmer found in his field. Usually dispatch is descriptive in their radio communications, but the only time they aren't descriptive are when they are concerned about the media monitoring the radio and don't want to say certain trigger words. I remember one night after a murder scene, I got on the radio and advised dispatch there was still blood splatter on the scene, and we needed fire to return to the scene to hose down an area. Sergeant Oakley called me into his office later that night and made it very clear that I was never to say blood on the radio again. What a crock of shit, if you ask me. Anyway, I responded to the corn maze and met with a man wearing tall overalls and a gray goatee. "Hello, officer. Thanks for coming. I'm Ronald Baxter." Mr. Baxter was standing in front of his house. "Nice to meet you. I'm Officer Barkley." I met Mr. Baxter's handshake. "What did you find in your field this morning?" I found a skeleton." "Of what?" "I think a human. Here, I'll show you." I had my doubts. I thought maybe he found some bones of an old dog that was buried years ago. Mr. Baxter began walking towards his cornfield as the sun continued to rise, casting pink and yellow hues over his fields. We walked for approximately 10 minutes. We only made about 2 or 3 turns in the corn stalk since most of it had been cut down. Then Mr. Baxter stopped in front of me. He slowly lifted his hand and pointed towards the ground. "There." I looked down and saw a shallow hole filled with skeletal bones. There was no doubt that this was a human skeleton. "When did you find this?" I asked. "About an hour or so ago. At first I thought it was some random leftover Halloween decoration. I took a closer look and realized there was no way this was a Halloween decoration. This is a goddamn human skeleton." Mr. Baxter spit some of his sunflower seeds out onto the ground as he spoke. He was right. This was a human skeleton. I thanked Mr. Baxter for calling the police and told him he was free to go back up to his house while I called for backup to process the scene. Mr. Baxter nodded and slowly made his way back towards his farmhouse. He casually waved as he walked away and quietly yelled, "I'm sure my wife is waiting on the front porch for my return so that we can eat breakfast. Come grab me if you need anything, officer." I was about to get on my radio when I remembered Sergeant Oakley's warning about not disclosing too graphic of details over the radio. Instead, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Sergeant Oakley's number. I had no service. I began walking back towards the farmhouse to try and get reception. I stared at my cell phone.
Holding it in the air, I felt someone grab my shoulder from behind. I whipped around, expecting to see Mr. Baxter, but no one was there. A sudden rush of chills shot down my spine. I turned back to continue towards the farmhouse, but I was face to face with cornstalks nearly 8 feet tall. I spun back around, this time in a full circle. All I saw were cornstalks. Where was the farmhouse? I looked back down at my cell phone. Still no reception. Screw Sergeant Oakley's advice. I was just going to use my radio for backup. I pressed the mic button and heard the low-pitched dial tone that either meant someone else was talking at the same time as me, or that I had no reception for transmission. I released the button and listened. No one else was on the radio. I pressed the mic again and heard the same low-pitched tone. I had no reception for transmission. I needed to find my way out of this corn maze so that I could call for backup. The ground was still wet from the rain we got this past week. My boots suctioned to the ground with every step I took. I made a right turn, then a left, heading in the same direction towards the farmhouse. Dead end. I turned around and tried to go the other way. I made another right, then left turn, pulled my phone out of my pocket. Still no service. I swear I heard Mr. Baxter yell for his dog, Lady, to return home for breakfast. My walk turned into a slight jog. I headed towards the sound of his voice. Dead end. Nearly 10 minutes passed, and I couldn't find my way out of the corn maze. I repeatedly tried my cell phone and my radio with no luck. My anxiety kicked in. My breaths grew short, and my vision grew sharp. I stopped and closed my eyes to focus on all the sounds around me. I took in every sound and every vibration. I reopened my eyes and started towards the sound of a tractor in the distance. I turned left, then right, right again, and left. No dead ends. I continued. Then I heard a piercing scream. I froze for a moment before I turned around to face the direction of the piercing scream. I spun around and stared at a wall of cornstalks. What happened to the path I just walked down? I began to lose track of time and didn't know how long I'd been trying to escape this corn maze. I gave up on trying to stay within the corn maze and made my own path. I began sprinting through the field and held my hands in front of me to shield the cornstalks from hitting me in the face. I was becoming out of breath when I finally reached a break in the cornstalks and was back on path. I took a break to regain my composure and catch my breath. I looked to my left, then to my right. My eyes dropped down and I saw it. The skeleton was laying on the ground in front of me, to my right. I was back where I started. I sat down and held my head between my hands. Should I scream for help? I was embarrassed. I'm supposed to be the face of bravery. I didn't want to sound like a terrified girl to this farmer. It had to have been nearly 30 minutes by this point, if not longer. I screamed. I screamed so loud that I felt my vocal cords shaking. No response. What am I going to do? I thought out loud. I stood up, walked straight, figured if I walked long enough in a straight line, I would reach the end of the field. Finally, I saw it. I saw Mr. Baxter's farmhouse. Mr. Baxter was on his porch with his wife when he saw me approach. "Officer, did you call for backup then?" "No, I had no service out in the field." I'm embarrassed it took me so long to find my way back here and asked to use your home phone to call my sergeant." Mr. Baxter smiled and responded, "I only left you a minute ago. I'm not too sure why you'd be embarrassed about that." So quoth this raven.
If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.